We'll call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, I believe we only have one regret.
Yes, Madam Chair.
That's Councillor Nanda. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move along. There's no consent items, nor is there any confidential. And we'll move right into 5.1, which is the discussion item. Mr. Garby.
Thank you, Chair Duddick, and good evening, members of the committee. Over the past few months, together we painted a picture of the vision for Midtown, and it continues to evolve. We have reviewed the context and opportunities for the future, and we have explored some of the forecasts in Oakville, and tonight we'll begin to put meat on the bones and look at different land use options for Midtown. We understand that there is a lot to digest. We've also heard that the committee and the public feel that the timeframes may be too compressed. And to address this, we're adding an additional Midtown Committee of the Whole meeting in late January. This way you can hear from Lee and Mark and Jeff, understand the context and information, provide an extended opportunity to reflect and comment on the aspects that you feel contribute to the best plan. We will get some feedback tonight, but this is not the only opportunity to provide feedback. At December Committee of the Whole, you will hear a summary of the public feedback on the options and provide additional direction to the team as they begin to prepare the preferred option for presentation in January. And for the public, these concepts will also be subject, as you will hear, of consultation at the end of November in smaller workshop settings. And Mark and Lee will provide a little bit more detail on how that's going to unfold. But for now, I'll turn it over to Jeff to kick us off with this evening's presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, members of council. Thank you for taking the time to come watch our presentation tonight. So this is COW number 4, and we're here today to talk to you about the phase 2 of our work. So just a quick agenda for tonight, where we are in the OPA process, some of the work that we've done to date, and then we'll get right into some of the concept options that Mark and Lee will help describe in greater detail. We'll help set the stage, review 3 of the concepts that we've prepared for discussion, and then we'll talk about next steps and what we're doing with these concepts and how they will frame our OPA and our policies and next steps of implementation. We'll then share some of the upcoming communications and engagement steps in our work program. So where we are in the process, we've just started to finish phase 2 of our work, which is a land use block concept. So we've created 2D land use concepts that shape and frame Midtown. We're now here to present that information to yourselves, and we'll also be going out for another round of public engagement as well as stakeholder engagement. We'll then, after this process, be moving into phase 3, which is a preferred option, and sort of finding elements of each concept that we like and moving them together into a preferred. Some of the work done to date, we've obviously been to this community of the whole 3 times. In July, we came with some high-level visioning and an outline of our program. In August, we detailed our official plan amendment process and some of our refined engagement plan. And then last month in October, we came to you with our findings from our existing conditions review and how these are related to the OPA that we're crafting. Through this time, we've also met with the residents associations within Oakville. We've met with developers and landowners. We've also established and met with a technical advisory committee to help inform us on technical elements of the program. We also had our first public information center on October 25th, and we'll be looking forward to our next round of engagement with the public and stakeholders and through the technical advisory committee and the developers on the 24th, 28th, and 29th of November. And just a recap of some of the things that had happened at our first public information center. We had about 151 attendees. More than half of those were new to the Midtown consultation process. About 87% of those attendees were all from Oakville, so it was a great turnout from residents of Oakville, and we were able to reach all 5 Oakville postal codes. So we had a reach across Oakville. During the event, we held a Q&A as well as 4 informational booths where we heard from various members of the public. Areas of interest there include, sustainable density, transit, cycling, traffic and congestion, affordable housing, architecture and design, crime and safety, community services such as school, police, and fire, parks and green space, arts, cultural attractions, and a lot more. A more detailed recap of all of this information and what we've heard in a summary report will be prepared and shared online shortly. So now that gets us into phase 2 of our work. So what we've been doing is we've been developing draft land use block concepts in 2D form, which help convey the mobility, public realm, precinct strategies with high-level theories on character and built form within the Midtown area. So this includes things like height, density, transition, and uses of the lands. We're going to be evaluating these draft land use block concepts using the draft OPA vision and other place-based criteria with members of the public as we bring this out for consultation. And we've also been aligned with our other program works in evaluating the impacts on our servicing and transportation. And so we'll be, through this process, we'll be reporting back on some of the draft findings of the above in the next phase of our program. So now I'll pass it off to Mark, who will set the stage and share the concepts that we've prepared.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of council. Delighted to be with you here again, this time to talk really about the 2-dimensional block plan scenarios for Midtown. And really what we're trying to achieve here is moving towards a complete community for Midtown. We're at a unique place in the tailored OPA process, and we really do have an opportunity to define Midtown's unique urban structure, its distinct places and distinct attributes. So this is actually quite exciting. It's quite an exciting moment that not all communities have in terms of creating a place from scratch. And so that's why this is such an important moment where we're at with the 2-dimensional concepts. Again, what does this mean? This means we want to consider the overall urban structure of Midtown. How is it organized? How are the land uses positioned? What's next to various different types of land uses? Where is the shopping, arts, and cultural districts? Where are the employment areas? How do they mix, or how are they separated? What's the overall park and open space network like? These are all really important ingredients of a successful, complete community. And I think we have some really interesting scenarios to show you tonight about what constitutes a real complete community. In terms of a complete community and its definition, it really is a place that offers opportunities for people of all ages and abilities to conveniently access most of the necessities of day-to-day living. This includes a mix of jobs, different types of jobs, local shopping, local stores and services, a full range of housing, transportation options, public service amenities, and of course outdoor recreational amenities, including parks and open spaces. And those are really the sort of the jewels in an urban environment. Those are the elements that we all collectively share, and they need to be designed very carefully to meet the aspirations of the community as a whole. Complete communities are age-friendly, and in Midtown, this will translate into a vibrant, high-density, mixed-use, transit-supportive, that's very important, pedestrian-oriented urban environment with high-quality urban places and destinations. What more could you want? This is sort of like a menu of wonderful attributes. As a complete community, Midtown will be integrated, of course, into the broader Oakville community, and it will have access to important regional services and amenities, such as the Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital and municipal arenas. And I know you have many, and they are favorite places for many of your community. The two-dimensional concepts all, I think, illustrate emerging objectives for Midtown that build on this notion of what is a complete community. And so these are organized by topic, and for each of these topics, we've developed an intent. And of course, this can be embedded into the overall official plan policy framework. So I want to just review these because these are about very specific goals and objectives for how Midtown should evolve. So for mobility, the intention is to develop a connected road and mobility network that supports multimodal circulation. That means lots of different ways of getting around on foot, on bike, by car, and by transit, which all affords a significant choice of movement. And that's important in an urban environment. For the road network, the intention is to develop a road network that allocates elements of the public realm to best support pedestrians, cyclists, and street-level shopping environments. These are the things that you want to see and use and be within during your leisure hours, during the weekend. And this will also best support active transportation. For built form, the intention is to promote a compact urban form that supports a human-scaled street wall, the part that encloses you, with higher elements developed through slender point tower elements, creating a distinct skyline, but also preserving sky views or views to the sky. We don't want this built form to obliterate those views of the sky. And of course, sunlight is very important in terms of integrating and touching the parks that we're going to be proposing. For parks and open space, we want to establish a connected network of parks and open spaces that have a distinct character, a role, and a function that is well-defined for each element. With regard to height and density, we want to allocate the greatest height and density to those areas with the most complex land use mix. So areas where land uses are overlain one on top of the other. Residential, commercial shopping, employment, that is the most complex land use pattern that we would potentially find in Midtown. Livability, the intention here is to provide housing and employment options and a range of destinations that can support a vibrant and livable urban environment for people of all life cycle stages. And that's really important. If you can build it for kids that are 8 and for people who are 80, I think you've done exactly the right thing. We have some more of these. Placemaking. The intention here is to cultivate places that can both surprise and delight and reinforce Midtown as a distinct community and foster a sense of belonging. We want people to really become attached to this as a place. Innovation. The intention here is to create office and educational districts that can support the next generation of innovators, skilled workers, and problem solvers. And our economy and our culture really depends on that. High quality design. The intention here is to ensure high-quality urban design reflected through built and living elements, that means landscape, offering both a unique architectural and open space expression. So that's a high aspiration, but it's a worthy aspiration. Transition. We need to provide appropriate transitions between new elements in Midtown Oakville and neighboring areas, particularly the neighboring area to the south of Midtown. Investment. The intention here is to facilitate public investment in transit, parks and open spaces, civic facilities, and targeted economic development strategies. How do you attract the employment uses that you potentially envision here? That could be an important economic development strategy as you move into, pardon me, implementation. And finally, sustainability. It's not the last thought. Always needs to be high on the list, but promote sustainable development practices throughout this community, make them visible. So those are a series of objectives that support the intention for a complete community. Now we're going to move into setting the stage for the two-dimensional land use block concepts. And Lee is going to explain how we arrived at these concepts and their various elements. Lee?
Good evening. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so I'll walk us through a little bit of the methodology behind the concept. So that helps us understand kind of the premise upon that we're working as we get into, Mark will come back and describe the concepts themselves. So I think it's helpful to set that context. So some clarity around what's included and what's not included in the concepts. And as Mark has described, we're thinking about land use and precinct strategies. So what you're going to see and what Mark shares with us is different ways to focus residential uses, employment, arts, culture, and office type of uses, and where those may be distinct from one concept to another. We'll see illustrations of the street network, parks and open spaces, locations for community amenities, different articulations of retail streets and districts and where that focus of energy could be, an active transportation network, and those height and density ranges, as Mark mentioned. So that's what will be in the concepts. In terms of what's not included in the package that we're reviewing tonight is a number of different details that are better explored at later stages of the process, either through the policy that we'll be developing in the official plan amendment or in other planning tools. So for example, we're not addressing unit mix size or approaches to affordability in this discussion tonight. Specific urban design standards beyond the principles that Mark's already described are not included. Details of the road rights-of-way widths or parking strategies, phasing and implementation, or servicing improvement phasing and that type of thing are to be brought on board later through the process, much of which will be addressed in the phase 4 of our official plan amendment drafting, where we'll actually have policy direction that helps articulate how we actually achieve what we see in the concepts. So I will review, let's say about 6 or so common elements that we see throughout each one of the concepts. So from concept to concept, these things are going to be the same. And then I'll talk about what's going to be unique from each one of the concepts. So in terms of a common element that we're starting with, the road network is a very important one. And this road network is generally consistent with the town's initiated OPA as of 2017. So a structure of streets and blocks that's largely been in the public realm since 2017, and based on the EA that was completed in 2014. There have been minor modifications to some of the alignments, but the intent here is to create that a finer-grained system of public streets and blocks upon which development can then be articulated. So this is what you'll see concept to concept is a generally consistent road network. One of the other things that we've considered in the concepts is the approved developments in Midtown. There are a handful, and we want to make sure we're reflecting reality as we understand it. And so we have had consideration for the approvals that have already been in place here in Midtown, and those are listed here on this slide. But just to assure you that we have taken that into account as we've looked at how the concepts are arranged. One of the things that I think is really important to reinforce is this notion of an underlying land use. The diagrams that Mark will show include different focuses of land use mixes, a residential focus, or an employment focus, or an office focus. In large part, save and except for the very far east portion of Midtown, we're assuming a residential a base, if you will, that there's an underlying residential land use permission, and then a mix of land use on top of that. And the concepts that Mark will walk us through focus on a certain type of mix. So some may be more of a retail mix or more of a direction towards office. So we just wanted to be clear that there is an intention for residential mixed-use development with additional uses on top of that. The area to the far east in Midtown has long been identified as an office commercial area that is related to its adjacency to higher intensity industrial kind of manufacturing type land uses to the east. And we continue to carry that forward as an employment only zone. And that's the basis of the concept as well, as that's consistent through each one that you'll see. Another piece that you will see is the idea that we don't want to preclude additional future access to transit on the east side of Trafalgar. So what we've done is carried forward an idea that emerged in the 2012 work that was done with Metrolinx in the town at the time that articulated an approach to accessing additional transit on the east side of Trafalgar. So the details of how that actually is arranged is something that will require additional study and conversation, but our concepts preserve for that opportunity. And we thought that was an important thing to carry forward, especially with such a long-term plan. We didn't want to preclude that opportunity to access additional transit on the east side of Trafalgar Road. One of the things that's also common amongst each one of the concepts is the population and employment yields. So the concepts represent a policy intention for the long-term evolution of Midtown, and the resulting people and job numbers do exceed the 2051 estimates that we've reviewed with you all in the past, and they result in approximately the same people and job output. So each one accommodates the 2051 projections, which is, again, that about 32,000 people and about 17,000 jobs. And the concepts show additional growth beyond that, because again, we're looking beyond 2051, we're looking for the very long-term evolution. So the concepts all demonstrate about the same yield, which is estimated to be about 62,000 people and 19,000 jobs. And I want to mention that along with the other types of policies that we'll be developing, there's ways in the future policy framework to tie addressing the alignment of infrastructure along with people and job growth so that we're ensuring the logical sequence of that growth with the infrastructure together so that there may be a very long-term, higher number here that's presented, but there's strategies within the policy where we can align those things together and ensure that we're planning logically for the provision of infrastructure along with growth. The last common element is active transportation network. So this is a layer on top of the street network, and this provides an intent around active transportation for Midtown, so whether that be through bike lanes, multi-use trails, or existing trails that are in large part on the south side of Midtown today. But you'll see this reflected in each one of the concepts, and also the notion of a mid-block connection, which is something that's consistent through the concepts as well, which further breaks up those development blocks and provides other ways for people to move around and adds to the active transportation network. And then there are unique elements that we will see change from concept to concept. And these add to the unique look and feel and character of the concepts. So the location and character of the neighborhood precincts is something that you will see change from concept to concept. Also, the location and arrangement of those non-residential uses that layer on top of that residential focus, such as the different focus for office or education uses or retail clusters, or the different focus areas for civic or community uses. The other thing that you'll see change is the parks and open space network in terms of their size and location. The intent, of course, is there to create a wonderful network of parks and open space. How it's articulated from concept to concept slightly changes from A to B to C. And as well, the location and arrangement of height and density also shifts from concept to concept, again, aligned with the principle that Mark outlined of the highest kind of intensity and complexity of mix of uses is generally aligned with where we see the higher density and higher heights of buildings. So with that description, I'll pass it back over to Mark, who will take us through the concepts.
Thank you, Lee. Just in terms of just a brief orientation to the overall concepts, I just want to highlight what you're looking at here. The road network helps us to provide a kind of a sense of orientation. You can see in the middle of the image here is Trafalgar. It's on an angle. It's the only street that's really on a significant angle. You can see that it goes underneath the transit rail tracks, and connects to Cornwall Road in the far south, which is really at the far southern end of the study area. You can see the QEW and the South Service Road makes up the northern edge. And you can see just above the tracks, the road with arrows on either side of it is what we call Cross Avenue. That figures prominently in all of the options, potentially as a retail street, a shopping street, but it also has a transit function, and it could have a very well-developed active transit situation as well. The road directly above that is what we call the Davis-Argus extension. Here, these two roads are brought together to form a continuous connection across east and west, with an underpass underneath Trafalgar Road, and that's how that connection is made. To the far east, you will see that there is a new overpass that is coming across the QEW and is connecting all the way to Cornwall. That's an overpass, and then it goes underneath the tracks and connects back up to Cornwall. I wasn't going to go into that level of detail, but I think it's useful just in terms of orienting everybody in the room in terms of what you're looking at. So thank you for that, that moment there. So the 2D concepts. So I'm very excited to present these to you. What we're looking at a glance is 3 different concepts that all reflect the same population and job, people and job totals. I'm going to give you just a little bit of facts about each one before I describe them more in detail. Concept A, which is the top concept, is what we call the Trafalgar Central Employment Focus. You can see that blue area is split on either side of Trafalgar. That is a mixed-use employment and educational focus. The darker blue is an educational campus. This is the option that reflects the greatest diversity of land use mix amongst all 3 options. It has a centralized office focus located along Trafalgar. It has the greatest amount of retail and shopping. And in fact, that pink area is what we call the arts, culture, and shopping district. And it's outfitted with a series of parks, and I'll come back to that. The retail focus is primarily along the Argus-Davis retail edge, which is a place where we can create a very tight urban street with traffic in 2 directions and off-peak parking so that we get a very connected main street with active uses on both sides. This option has the largest civic space. It's on the east side of the option. You can see that dark green large space is the civic space. The second option, just briefly, is what we call the West Office Educational Campus. So all of the really complex mix of land uses are moved to the west of Trafalgar in this option. This reflects the moderately diverse land use mix, so it's right in the middle. You can see that it has a singular office node built around a civic park adjacent to transit, which I'll come back to. It has a retail focus along Cross Avenue, and this is different than the first option because Cross will have a retail focus, likely an active transportation focus, and a transit focus. So this will also be a bus route. So this will not be the same kind of tight urban Main Street as proposed in option 1. It will be a larger road, and it will accommodate multiple modes of movement. And finally, this has a multiple number of civic spaces that are all really situated along Cross Avenue. You can see the one is south of Cross, and on the east side, the 3 of them are all north of Cross. And finally, the last scenario is what we really call 2 employment centers, one on the east, one on the west of Trafalgar. This has the least diverse land use mix. It is comprised of 2 office nodes. It has the least amount of office, which is configured on Cross again, and it surrounds those 2 civic spaces that ground each of the office and broader neighborhood focus. And it has multiple civic spaces, one in each of those office nodes, as well as multitude of neighborhood parks and open spaces. Now I'm just going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. So Trafalgar A, the central employment focus, we really start with that mixed-use office and education focus right at Trafalgar, right as a signature point of entry into the community. This is not necessarily going to be a place where we envision having retail, but we do envision having an education campus that's attached to employment uses, and there's often very wonderful synergies that happen between educational institutions and employment. You know, when you train and you make the next generation of workers, very often they go next door into that employment focus. If we look further to the west, that pink area is really what we're calling the mixed-use arts, culture, and shopping focus. And so this isn't just one main street, this is a number of shopping streets that would have a retail, that would have retail at grade. You can see there's a north-south street in the middle of that shopping district that connects to 2 parks inside the pink circle and then connects across the tracks through a bridge connection, a pedestrian above-grade bridge connection, to a 3rd park on the other side of the tracks in a mixed-use residential precinct. We could envision that per se when Metrolinx comes forward with a development plan for their lands, but at least that's what we should ask for in terms of connecting both the north and the south sides that are separated currently by the tracks. Further to the the west, we see a mixed-use residential precinct that has got the remainder of the Argus Davis Main Street, a school, and a couple of other park spaces. Interestingly, 2 of these park spaces overlook 16 Mile Creek and would be wonderful places to be and to take in that broader, important landscape, which is an important part of your context. If we now look at the east side, on the other side of the dark blue education focus, we see a large mixed-use residential precinct with a large community park. That community park is 3 hectares in size. It is accommodating a potential school site as well, and to the north is a retail edge, and then the Davis Street continues into an office employment precinct, which is the only precinct that doesn't have an underlying residential district. So this is pure office. And you will notice that the office precinct is grounded by a park. If you go all the way along the Davis-Argus Road, you come to another park. So this option is bookended by 2 parks, one that arrives at an employment area, the other that arrives at 16 Mile Creek. To the south, south of the Hydro Corridor, which can also be developed in consultation with Hydro for some recreational uses. We don't know how many, but we don't want to call those parks. They're not ever going to be parks, but they can provide a park-like function. But towards the south, on the other side of the tracks, we have 3 mixed-use residential precincts, each grounded by a neighborhood park and local serving retail amenities. And that's really the first option. I'm going to show you some precedent images, just in terms of here is what the office and educational focus could look like. Again, we're not envisioning in many cases that office would be the entire use of a single building. It might be the podium of a building with residential above. We would be lucky if we could get a single high density skyscraper office in this, but we recognize in today's market, office is a bit of a sensitive use, and that's not likely. It is likely that it could come as part of a building ensemble, and particularly as part of a podium. Here we see this notion of the Main Street focus, and this could be the focus for Argus Davis. Again, an intimate Main Street, 2 lanes of traffic, parking on the one side that is used for travel in non-peak or in peak traffic, generous public realm, generous streetscaping, generous planting, and lots of places for people to spend their leisure hours. This could be an amazing addition, and it's not unlike your downtown Main Street, which is lovely. The next images really portray the arts, culture, and shopping focus. This image on the left is from Calgary, Stevens Avenue, which has opportunities for street closures. It's close to transit, very similar to your circumstance. And parks in that location or close to the arts, shopping, and cultural precinct or focus could also have a performing arts outdoor component. So these are opportunities that can be seized when you put these things together and you're creative with how you want to use them. Again, here in Concept A, we have the far eastern office employment focus. Again, this is office on its own. This does not have a residential component, but you can see this is a handsome set of office uses at the very far end near the Chartwell district. I want to share some of the unique places that are within this option, and those include the parks and the distribution of parks and where they are, their sizes, the active transportation network, and retail and community uses. So in this option, looking at the east side, you can see the large community park with that school in it. You can see the yellow street around it, which means that we're thinking about the potential to temporarily close that street section for celebrations. This would be on a pedestrian Sunday, for example. Something like that could really be a wonderful feature. You can see that that park is shaped by a main street on its north side. And then it also has active uses with retail that are shown in orange and called retail focus, so that there are multiple places to get the day-to-day amenities. You can see that there's the potential for community use, the C that's on the east side as well. And you can see these arrows, green arrows that travel across Cross and travel across Argus and on some north-south streets. This is where we're thinking of having the active transportation network. And you can see it's a looped network. It is a continuous cycle that connects into the existing signed bicycle route to the south, as well as it connects through via a multi-use trail to the network that's on the other side of the QEW. So this is something that's actually really important to think about now. This will be developed through Designing Midtown, and it'll be developed further through the Parks and Open Space Master Plan, which I am leading with your municipal folks, and I'm delighted about that as well. On the west side, we see the Arts, Culture, and Shopping District, identified here in pink. Again, Argus is the main street on this side. You can again see another potential temporary street closure, a north-south street, which connects a park in the north to a park in the south to the existing transit network with an overpass to another park in the mixed-use residential precinct to the furthest southern area. You can see there's community uses on this side as well as opportunities for additional school sites. And again, the hydro corridor provides another form of more passive, passive and potentially active recreational uses. I just want to highlight this concept has, as you know, residential neighborhoods and an underlying residential land use base. These images are of some of the parks and open spaces that could be envisioned as a neighborhood park to the left, as a community park to the right. Again, something that really brings the community together in the same way as your community comes together in a neighborhood. This is just a high-density neighborhood. And of course, let's talk about the amount of parks and open spaces that we have here. You can see the very skinny linear green lines. Those are what we're calling mid-block connections. We don't count those as park spaces. We would potentially permit parking underneath them, but they do provide an important component of the overall active transportation network. They serve to divide up large blocks into smaller blocks that are more handleable, if you will. You can see that we have the large community park at about 3 hectares. All of the nine neighborhood parks add up to about 5.5 hectares, and the total parks with existing is about 12.2 to be exact, and this is about 12% of the total land area in Midtown. And then when we get to heightened density, again, as Lee indicated, and as I indicated earlier, the greatest heights and densities will go to the areas that have the most complex land use mix. And in this case, it's the mixed use arts and culture and shopping focus adjacent to transit at 7 FSI and up to 45 stories. Things transition down from there to 6 FSI, 5 FSI, and the office employment precinct, which is standalone office, is at 2 FSI. The neighborhood to the south is at 4 FSI. And again, all this adds up to approximately just under 80,000 people and jobs in this area. Again, this is an intention. The time frame for this is unknown. It'll be based on how the landowners and the market want to respond to the policy framework that's put in place. So again, timing is not always known in official plan processes such as this. The second option, we are calling the West Office Educational Campus Focus. And so here you see all of the complex land uses are moved west of Trafalgar, and they're in the western precinct. So we see an office and educational campus that's built around a large civic community park with excellent access to transit in the south on the west side. To the north of that, and grounded by a centralized park that connects to that central community park, is arts, culture, and shopping focus, but it's much smaller than in option A. We can see the mid-block connections connect to 2 parks to the far, far western edge, and again have that overlook over 16 Mile Creek. Again, that pedestrian bridge at the transit focus could occur when Metrolinx develops to provide another important north-south link to activate and connect that community into the mix of uses that's shown on the west. To the east, we really have, on the west, the shopping focus is really meant to be Cross Avenue. So again, in this option, and unlike the first, this will be a wider street that accommodates cars, likely cyclists, and likely buses. And so this does more work. It needs to be wider from building face to building face. Again, we have a more tight arts and culture and shopping district to the north, but Cross will be double duty as an all movement type of avenue. That connects to a series of community parks that are illustrated on the far east side of Trafalgar, linear parks that connect to a larger civic space that grounds a mixed-use residential neighborhood with a north-south segment that connects to more parks, and then ultimately that connects through mid-block connections to the office employment precinct. The southern precinct on the south side of the tracks is shown exactly the same as the first scenario. We don't have a lot of depth here. We don't necessarily need a lot of roads, but the policy framework wouldn't preclude them in this area. Each is grounded by a park and a set of retail and commercial uses. Next slide. Here we have some imagery of the West Office and educational focus. The image on the left is from San Francisco. This is at an important transit center in downtown San Francisco. And here's the same neighborhood, just a different perspective. That element that's flying in the sky is really an elevated bus bay, if you can believe it, but it's treated with public art, and it has become a very significant feature, but also provides all the transit access. Very clever use of basically a big parking structure. Wouldn't that be interesting if we could do that with the Metrolinx parking structure that's on the site today? Here we have neighborhood parks and open spaces, and again, Yaletown is a perfect example of what we could see in terms of a large community park and residential development around its edges. And of course, we can program these parks with any range of uses, from dog park to children's play area to Crokinole. All of these things are possible. We just need to reflect what your community is interested in as we move forward. The arts, culture, and shopping focus, one that is quite noticeable in Canada is Place des Arts in Montreal. This is really a trade center with a range of changeable outdoor public art installations that make it a very animated part of the city. And to the right, we see a really beautiful King William Street in Hamilton, which has a pedestrian focus and which is closed to traffic on certain parts and certain days of the week. But this has really become a very rich part of Hamilton and part of Hamilton's renewal. Next slide. Here we see the office employment, which is only office in the far, far east. This is Cheswick Business Park. It's very beautiful. And this doesn't mean that we can't develop an office business park with beautiful public realm. In here, stormwater management figures prominently and really actually functions almost as a water body, a lake, if you will, that really offsets really wonderful built form. Again, some of the unique places in this scenario, what you'll notice here is that along Cross Avenue, with the arrows, the green arrows on either side of the street, we have a series of parks, large civic community space on the west side that connects over to multiple numbers of community spaces on the east side. You can see that yellow hatched area, again, is an opportunity for a temporary street closure, for celebrations, for active community use out in the streets, out in the parks. These are the kinds of things that we want to think about now. You can see the community uses, the potential for schools, and of course, the arts, culture, and shopping district in light peach color. In terms of the provision of parks and open spaces, with the existing parks, this option provides slightly more than the first at 12.7. So this is almost 13% of the total land area, whereas the first option presented approximately 12%. Again, the parks are at different locations, and they do different things. They perform different functions. And of course, we get to the height and density again. The 7 FSI up to 45 stories is in the most complex land use precinct, which is the employment educational campus next to transit. That's where you would kind of expect to see the highest density. Then we have, we move down to 6 and 40 stories just to the north, and that's because we have also the arts, shopping and cultural district as part of that residential neighborhood. And then to the east of Trafalgar, we transition down to 5 FSIs. That is a neighborhood that is mostly defined by parks and retail spaces at grade. And of course, on the southern precinct, exactly the same as the first option. Again, total people at jobs, approximately 80,000. The last scenario is really the egalitarian one, the one that is most fair to the both sides of Trafalgar. We treat Trafalgar almost identically on both sides with an employment center identified here in blue on the west, surrounded by a mixed-use residential precinct, grounded by 2 civic spaces on either side of Cross Avenue. And then on the east side of Trafalgar, we see another employment precinct, also grounded by a civic space, with schools and other parks and open spaces and mid-block connections that link into an educational focus, and finally to the office employment precinct. This, again, as I said, is the least complex land use mix. This, if you wanted an option that's easiest to do, potentially it's this one. But maybe this is not what you should do. Maybe you should do something that's harder to achieve, but maybe delivers more in the end. Here is some images around what the 2 employment centers might look like. Here we are looking at parts of the north end of Boston, notable for its employment uses, and Rainbow Park in Vancouver, which is a very interesting and active place. Again, grounding these employment uses with these civic park spaces is going to be very, very important. And of course, the employment and education focus on the east side could take on a character like Rose Wharf in Boston, and of course, Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, which is a very interesting civic space with lots of public art that kind of changes throughout the year with both permanent installations and seasonal installations. Here you can see the unique places in this option. Again, this option is really linked together by Cross Avenue, which provides that retail spine throughout the community. That retail spine, again, is on a larger road that does multiple things from a movement perspective. It's framed by retail uses. You can see the yellow temporary street closure opportunities that are around the Civic Square. And you can see where we have potentially identified opportunities for community use and schools, and you can also see how the mid-block connections and the neighborhood parks create a secondary network of parks and open spaces. And that's true of all of the options. We have a sort of a primary retail and civic set of spaces, and then almost a secondary set of neighborhood-based parks and open spaces. And the 2 systems are linked through an active transportation network. Here, again, this concept delivers approximately 12.4 hectares. So we're delivering 12 to 13% of parkland in all of the scenarios. So that's a very consistent percentage of parkland. Again, the height and density here, 7 FSI, 45 up to 45 stories in height, next to the existing transit station. It transitions down to a 5 FSI for the remainder of that neighborhood, which doesn't have a lot of complexity to it. Across on the other side of Trafalgar, we have, again, the second employment focus 6 FSI with approximately 40 stories that's next to the proposed transit station, and that's really the reason that that's slightly less in terms of height and FSI. The education focus at 5 FSI and 30, and the employment is consistent across all 3 options, as is the southern precincts at 4 FSI and 25 stories in height. So what are our next steps? Well, we need to move from these concepts to a preferred concept. But first, we need to engage your community in evaluating and discussing these options as a first step. We want to understand what people like, what they don't like, what is missing. We want to engage on each of these concepts at the next round of public engagement, and that's going to occur this month towards the end of November. These are smaller group sessions of approximately 50 to 60 participants, very active, very hands-on. Participants will have maps of each of the scenarios at a desk and work through a series of workbook questions facilitated by us and our team at Bespoke. And we'll have local transcribers and then a report back session around what are the elements that really have merit to you, because we're not really selecting any one of these scenarios. We're going to take the elements that people like best from each of these scenarios and combine it into a preferred scenario. At least that's what I think we're doing. The community may prove me wrong, but we'll see. We'll evaluate the outcomes of public feedback through that engagement against the emerging and draft vision and goals. Some of those goals and objectives I've presented today, but some of them are also from Public Information Center number 1. Ultimately, we'll merge those into a single set of vision and objectives for Midtown as a whole. And we'll do that as we move into phase 4, as we develop the policy framework. At Committee of the Whole, number 5, which is scheduled for December, I believe it's December 12th, we will present the characteristics and elements of the preferred concept. So this, not sure what that will look like just yet. Hopefully it will be an amalgam of everything that people like. Again, we're only going to collect the last bit of feedback from the public on, I think, November 30th. So that gives us 12 days to make that preferred scenario. Bear with us. We'll do our best to deliver that to you at that time. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to my colleague, Jeff.
Thanks, Mark. So as Mark mentioned, we're going to be moving on into, after this round of public consultation at the end of the month, into the next phase of our work, which is, combining a lot of the things that you've just seen into a preferred option in phase 3, and we'll be coming back to you for Committee of the Whole number 5 to discuss some of the preferred directions, and then in Committee of the Whole number 6, which is now scheduled for January, we'll have that 3D demonstration plan and sort of a final draft view of what that plan looks like for more comments and feedback, and then some additional refinement before we begin to finalize our policies and schedules for the OPA. And so I think Mark actually shared a lot of this already, but just walking through what we're doing at the end of the month with the public. So we're doing traveling consultations. We're actually doing it in 3 different locations across Oakville to try to reach a broader audience. As I mentioned in the first PIC, we actually reached people across Oakville in all 5 postal code areas. And so one will be held at Iroquois Ridge Community Center, one will be held at the Sheridan College just north of Town Hall, one will be held at Walton United Church on the southwest of Oakville. Each of them will have an introductory presentation. We'll be sharing the same 3 concepts, very similar presentation to what you've seen today. We'll highlight some of the key elements, and then we'll have smaller roundtable discussions with the groups. It'll be facilitated, and that'll be their opportunity to share with us what they like, what they don't like, and then we'll have a share back at the end so everyone gets a chance to hear what everyone else has said and discussed. And like we had mentioned, there's a range of questions that we're going to ask. What elements do you really support? What elements do you really disagree with? What are things you'd like to see? So, there's a range of questions here that we'll be working through with the public as a bit of a facilitated discussion. There's also going to be an online component for those who might not be able to attend in person. So there'll be a survey along with the information available for the public to review and fill out if they're not able to attend one of the in-person sessions. As we understand, it's difficult to make time to attend some of these. And just the timelines of when these are happening. So the 24th, the 28th, and the 29th are when the 3 traveling consultations are happening. The 24th is at Sheridan, the 28th is happening in the afternoon at Iroquois Ridge, and then the 29th in the evening at the Walton United Memorial Church. On the 29th, during the day, we're also hosting our Technical Advisory Committee and Developer Stakeholder meeting. So we'll be meeting with a range of stakeholders across the program to understand their feedback as well. December 12th is when we come back to you for Committee of the Whole number 5, and then January 30th is when we come back to you again for Committee of the Whole number 6. And that'll also be then followed by another round of public engagement where we go out and share some of the draft preferred concepts based on the feedback that we've gathered. So upcoming to our work, obviously, we're going to be preparing and posting online a summary of the engagement that we've just conducted in late October, and then what the preferred 3D option with refinements and policy directions are going to be as part of phase 3 of our work. And so, yeah, just a recap of where we are in the process. We're here in November. We're going into our preferred option once we're done this round of public and stakeholder consultation. And then in January, that's when we'll start moving into final recommendations. And that's the end of our presentation for tonight. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm in your hands. There's a number of delegates, as you know. We also want to circle back to those list of questions and get some preliminary feedback. So if you'd like to hear the delegations first and circle back, we're in your hands.
I think we'll do that first. Thank you very much for that. Is that okay with you, Councillor Adams? Thank you. We'll start with our first delegation. I believe that's Alicia Bedford. Is it, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Madam Chair, with Oakville Community Association.
Welcome. You have 10 minutes.
I figured it out. Good evening, council members. My name is Alicia Bedford, and I'm a member of the Oakville Community Association. And I'm here this evening to provide some comments about the Midtown development area. First slide, please. OCA's vision is that it wants to contribute to creating an engaged, safe, caring, and vibrant community where all residents enjoy a positive quality of life. Next slide, please. This slide shows a potential depiction cross-section of Midtown with a number of high-rise buildings. This is concerning because, as we know from studies, such 59-story towers could generate over 100% more carbon emissions than a 20-story tower. Slide 3, please. As a reminder, this is the aerial view of Midtown and of 103 hectares of land. What is the amended official plan to alleviate flooding concerns, shadowing, and property encroachment, which could be a problem for the residents south of Midtown perimeter? Next slide, please. This slide depicts several issues. In previous presentations, OCA has mentioned a number of these issues related to Midtown, including increased traffic congestion, high density, and the unknown cost of the infrastructure. The land in question is really bad and many deficiencies to overcome. What about schools to accommodate the 30,000 residents in Midtown by 2051? What is the plan for medical care for so many people? Over 10% of the current Oakville population will be there. Are there any concerns about the developers' finances and bankruptcies? There are renewed concerns due to the report of a recent developer in Mimico with many large-scale projects that could go bust with $20 million in debt. Slide 5, please. We need to talk about air quality and how Midtown would impact the air quality in the Oakville-Clarkson air shed. What are the recent studies telling us? Slide 6, please. The yellow outlined area outlines the air shed generally from east of Chartwell Road to west of Winston Churchill Boulevard, Lake Ontario to north of the QEW. How is this air quality impacted by emissions caused by these tall towers? Next slide, please. The provincial order in council dated September the 28th, 2009 required an action plan to improve the air quality in the Oakville-Clarkson airshed, and in the second paragraph, it states that there is a one-person task force established to look into this. How does the Midtown Plan accommodate the findings and recommendations of this one-person task force? Next slide, please. The task force report of the air quality to the minister dated June the 24th, 2010 confirmed that if the current population in the industry in the Oakville-Clarkson airshed remains static from 2010 to 2020, pollution loadings will be considerably less than in 2010. But as we know, that was not the case. And the report in 2010 went on to state that the approval of new emissions in the Oakville-Clarkson airshed should only be granted if there is no new net contribution to existing pollution levels. It appears that the changes in the past 23 years have made the task force report null and void. What is the plan to address the concerns of the new emissions that would be caused by Midtown? Slide 9, please. Some will remember the cancellation of the gas power plant that was contemplated in the Oakville-Clarkson airshed. Mayor Burton attended the Standing Committee on Justice Policy on March the 19th in 2013, and his comments included the following statements. Air quality was of particular concern in our area because the province had already identified our airshed as a vulnerable, overtaxed airshed. Another comment was, our airshed is overtaxed as the work of the province itself had shown. So there was quite a concern, he said. What is Mayor Burton's position now, since it appears that Midtown's emissions seem to conflict with his statements in 2013? Next slide, please. The following comments were made by residents about the Oakville-Clarkson airshed. This is from one of the Oakville residents. Our air quality studies conducted in 2006 by the Ministry of the Environment indicate that the airshed in the Oakville-Clarkson area is one of the most polluted airsheds in the province, and the Public Health Agency of Canada's Chronic Disease Surveillance Division reveals that among children ages 12 to 19, those living in Halton have the highest asthma prevalence in the province. Another concern from one of the residents was, more than a decade of study has proven that pollution along the Oakville-Mississauga border is a serious health and environmental problem. Slide 11, please. A bylaw to assess and control the health effects of major emissions of fine particulate matter in Oakville defines facility to include a residential site that contains less than 25 dwelling units. So therefore, since this includes all proposed buildings in Midtown for the most part, Does that mean the bylaw will have to be changed to accommodate the potential increase in emissions that will be created by Midtown high towers? Slide 12, please. The purpose of the bylaw is to protect human health and reduce the levels of particulate matter, not the opposite, which is exactly what amending the bylaw to generate more emissions will do. Slide 13, please. Oakville declared a climate emergency on June the 14th, 2019, and Mayor Burton stated that the entire community, including councils, town staff, businesses, and residents, has an essential role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. What's Mayor Burton's position today, since the statement seems to conflict with tall towers, which will add and not reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Slide 14, please. Regarding carbon footprints, what will the increased carbon footprint be with Midtown and 59-story towers? I leave you with this thought to ponder. Slide 15, please. Canada's National Observer here, dated November the 17th in 2021, indicates that the taller the building, the more carbon it emits at every stage of its life. And a study right here found a 140% increase in emissions from a neighborhood full of skyscrapers compared to an area of low and mid-rise buildings. Next slide, please. Regarding mega warehouses in Oakville, Oakville Council conditionally approved the site plans for a total of 5 buildings, 1.3 million square feet, and 226 loading docks. These are to be built on the west side of Winston Churchill, north of Lake Ontario. What would the impact of the emissions from the large trucks and other sources have on the Oakville-Clarkson airshed? Has there been a recent study done? Slide 17, please. Residents are concerned about the mega warehouses and the degradation of air quality in Oakville-Clarkson airshed, since truck traffic will be significant. There's an extrapolation. The extrapolations from a recent land use compatibility study from one of the developers indicate that aggregate traffic from the facilities will cause Canadian ambient air quality standard limits to be hugely exceeded. Slide 18, please. The boundaries of the Oakville-Clarkson airshed will not be contained. Yes.
We've had problems with our clock.
Okay.
So I think you've got about another minute if you want to try to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. The boundaries of the Oakville-Clarkson airshed will not be contained in the yellow deemed defined area. The airshed has unique regional challenges. Of note, there is a significant easterly component to the local winds and the even distribution of the winds blowing from northwest through to due south. Slide 19, please. The Oakville Community Association cannot support this development because of all the reasons previously outlined. The negative impact of the Oakville-Clarkson airshed, the unnecessary increased carbon footprints, contradictory to the town's declared climate emergency, and the cumulative air quality issues with Midtown and the mega warehouses. Finally, we confirm that OCA wants to work with Town Council and the town's planning department with the assistance of the province to develop a Midtown of which all Oakville residents can be proud. Next slide. Thank you very much for listening to us tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience with the clock.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, do we have the next delegation, please?
Madam Chair, the next delegation is George Niblock with Oakville Lakeside Residents Association.
Thank you, Mr. Niblock. You have 10 minutes, and I'll do it old school by the clock.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm George Niblock with the Oakville Lakeside Residents Association. Just reviewing the concepts today and this evening. Thank you for the presentation. A couple of comments. I'm glad to see that the floor space indexes are clearly outlined for each of the different areas. One of our concerns is that the population requirement for Midtown by 2051 is 32,000 and 17,000 jobs. What these plans aim for is a population of 61,000 and another 18,000 jobs, more or less. People in jobs, 80,000. So approximately double what the requirement is for Midtown by 2051. My concern there is that the way that the development is going to happen for the next 25 years is going to leave potentially a lot of holes in the neighborhood. Buildings spread out in different areas, very tall buildings spread out in different areas, potentially without the services and parks and so on that are described until it eventually fills in. If the intention is to achieve 32,000 by 2051, it's our assertion that that's what should be planned for. Planning for future development beyond 2051 to double the population at that point, if you plan for that now, it seems to me we're going to have an awful lot of tall buildings and blank spaces in between them where you don't have a complete community. The other issue that I see with the arrangement of the floor space index zones is that south of the tracks, on all three concepts, it's listed as 4 FSI, or 25 stories. This zone is adjacent single-family homes. It's the only area in all of Midtown that is adjacent to single-family homes to the south of Cornwall Road. And I just feel that that's way too high, 25 stories, and we have no idea when those will be built, whether it's now or in 25 years from now or beyond. It seems to me to plan for that or to allow for that now is irresponsible planning. If it's something that would happen in the future, surely this can be planned for at a later date, not now, to redevelop shopping plazas that are used by the entire community adjacent that site. The other point is that the arrangement of the FSI groupings in a lot of the options, concepts, are east to west rather than from the south building to the north. Typically, it's my understanding that if you're planning with the urban planning, you build up from the shoreline. So we're talking about the Lake Ontario being at the south and building higher as you get further north. So to me, the tallest FSI zones would be along the QEW corridor, and it would tear down to the south to Cornwall Road. Just a couple of points on the concepts. In general, concept A, I believe would be preferred. I note that education-focused areas, I'm presuming that that's some form of higher education or private rather than, there seems to be a distinction between schools and education zones. I note that the schools tend to be located adjacent to the residential areas, which I think is very important. I'm not sure what kind of other education is going to happen in those zones. The other point is that there's a lot of reference to shopping and retail districts, and I'm making an assumption that that includes restaurants and cafes, where you get a kind of outdoor culture of sitting outdoors on the streets, in the parks, and so on. There's a lot of, within these concepts, there's a lot of nice reference to Main Street shopping. But I don't see this in the types of applications we see coming forward. Main streets, if you look at them and the examples that have been given, are block to block. And, people, we set up patios like we do in downtown Oakville. There's parking. But the types of structures that developers seem to bring aren't really conducive to that type of building. And I wonder how that would happen. How do you create a main street in that traditional sense with a condo developer? Where it is block to block, there's very little setback from the road. And the other one was, there was reference to tall, skinny towers to allow light to get in. I liked that concept, but again, I wondered how that would be, how that in practicality actually happens with zoning. How do you encourage or require developers to build buildings of that shape?
Mr. Niblock, you've got 1 minute.
Oh, thank you. I'll hurry up. On concept B, there's a very, very nice arts and culture shopping district around a public square. I thought that was excellent. Love to see that in the final plan. I don't think that a shopping district on the main artery, Cross Avenue, is a good idea. And on concept C, seems like the office focus area has the largest parks. It would seem to me large parks adjacent to the residential areas should be the main focus. So just circle back that in general, the concepts are very interesting, but the feeling is that they're still overshooting the population target, and it is going to allow for a very uneven development for the next 25 plus years. And I think that the FSIs are just still too high, and in particular, perhaps they should look at reducing them, especially below Cornwall Road, and increasing them at a later time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your delegation. Next, I believe, Madam Clerk, we have Rick Snidel and Jim Goodfellow from Chartwell Maple Grove Residents Association. And similar to the former delegation, I'll do it old school by the clock.
Perfect. I also have my little clock here, so I'll try and keep on, keep on track. So thank you very much for allowing us to come here and make it come. And thank you to Jacob for all of the work you put in for this. We really have a feeling that we're making progress here and we're coming to grips with the issues. So you've given us a lot to chew on, but we have a very short period of time.
Could you just move the microphone so we can all hear you? And
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is try and comment on a few of the slides, and then Rick is going to come and talk about the financial part. So that's the way we're going to break it up. Let me start, though, by offering one observation about the follow-up sessions that you've scheduled. In our neighborhood, I think a resident are very anxious to contribute to this. We note there isn't a session for South Oakville. And so just wondering whether that could be arranged, or I know recognizing, people can get and go to the other sessions, but just wonder whether that could be arranged. The second piece is that it struck me from the design of this that in these sessions, we're always getting feedback from the residents about what's going to happen over there. Where do we get the customer, the people are going to none of these people are going to live in Midtown. They may move there, but where do we get, what's the target audience that we're really trying to attract into Midtown? How do we get their views as to what they really want? Because we're going to say, that's what I think should happen over there, but not him. So that's just a thought for you. Okay, so let me flip through here. First comment I have was on the vision statement. I'm a big fan of vision statements. I think they can serve as North Stars on big projects. They can, particularly big projects that involve multiple stakeholders and then partners and all of this kind of thing, and keep and over periods of time. I think you've made a big step forward in the vision statement, but I think you got more to do. One of the things is make it simple, make it compelling. Watch the planning jargon. You really want something that's going to come out and say, this is a compelling statement. This is where I can say where we really want Midtown to go, because it's going to take us 30 years to get there. And so that would be just a thought on the vision statement. And the other piece is I really like the introduction in the vision statement of the retail concept. And the other things were done. And emphasizing vibrant, where vibrant is not color, vibrant's energy. And when you go into different cities, whenever I went to a new city and I traveled, I always want to go and walk around, and you could get a feel for whether there was really energy in this place. And that's what we really want with Midtown, because right now, Midtown is not really opposite, commuting hours. Midtown's kind of dull. And it's kind of all concrete, and it's kind of all asphalt, and you want it to be vibrant. And so you really want to have at some point in time, the utopia would be you're sitting around on a Saturday afternoon and your family says, let's do something really exciting. Let's get on a bus and go to the GO station. Well, who would ever get on a bus and go to the GO station? No, but you want to go to the GO station because you want to go and you want to experience what's going on in Midtown. That's what we want to build. Okay, let's go to the next comment I have is on the, what is your slide 17? It's the road network. And that's a great slide. It shows you that most of the road network doesn't exist. Rick, looks very expensive. And it would also be neat to overlay that slide with who owns the land, because that adds to the expense. So that looks expensive, that slide, but so critical. If you want to build this vibrant community, you want streets that are alive, they're vibrant, that energy, the kind of thing, and it's going to be costly. Next is that I talk about is which George has already mentioned, the population estimates. We have the joint best practice population estimate, whatever that is, comes up with 32,000. Jacob's methodology is 62,000. That's not a slight difference. But let's also remember that these are neither one is right or wrong, because you're trying to estimate something that's out, 2050. And the big brains in the central banks, can't figure out whether we're going to have a soft landing, hard landing this next quarter, kind of thing. So, but I think it's important to understand the assumptions that are being made in there. What's the difference between the two, and what can we learn from that? And can this level of growth be sustained, which I think George talked about? if you took I did a compound interest kind of calculation, said, okay, we have a very small piece of people living in Oakville, 600 now in Midtown, and we want to get to 62,000. Okay, what's the growth rate you have to go? Well, the growth rate is 16.5% per year over 30 years. That's huge. Like, that's huge. And it's how do you bring in the infrastructure to support that? How do you bring in a retail network? Well, it's going to be, you just can't plan it to go say, okay, you're going to open this. So how do you evolve? So I think the notion of going at a pace that you can actually sustain the development of that is critical, which I think George alluded to in his comments. Next one that I had was slide 21, which is the long-term transit. If you're going to add all of these people, that's going to overwhelm the transit station. Chairman, I think the last one of the times I said, where is Metrolinx in all of this? It's presented here as kind of an option. You know, this is a necessity. You know, this is, how can you have this going ahead, you know, without that? Because the attractive feature of Midtown is that connection through the GO station. And so I don't know, so that would be comment on that one. The three concepts, we talked to the previous thing about the notion of having having alternatives. Delighted to see the three scenarios, the three concepts, and I think that's going to be. But the thing is, what's the criteria? What criteria are you going to use to evaluate the concepts? And let me suggest that I think you need to have investment and cost into that. I don't think this is a free choice. And I know that that has been talked about before, but I don't think you can really make this without that. Final, and I'm already encroaching upon Rick's time here, but the scenarios and the density calculations. Delighted to see now that we've fleshed that out. We're now seeing a bit of the sensitivity when we are 10, you know, moving to 7 and range 2 to 7. I think the policy choice you folks need to be thinking about is you need to have a minimum and a max. The minimum is what do you need to deliver on your commitments now to the province and that. Then the max is a choice you make. And I think you can run Jacobs run sensitivities on these and say, okay, well, what would a range of 2 to 5 look like? What would 2 to 6? What would 2 to 5? What would 2 to 4? And what does that do? And how does that does in the way of enable us to manage growth in the way that we can build sustainable infrastructure? And that's it. I think great progress. Congratulations to everyone that was involved in this, getting us this far. You've got a big job ahead with how do you pull this together? How do you arrive at that preferred solution? And you've got three big challenges left too, which is the transportation master plan, the stormwater master plan, and the area servicing plan. Those are all biggies. So good luck. And Rick,
It's Mr. Snyder, I'll give you 5 minutes on your own. It's always hard to do a combined presentation.
Thank you kindly, Madam Chair, and I apologize for my loquacious predecessor here. So greetings, everybody, and I will keep this to the point. CMGRA has been following this project from the beginning and supporting it as a viable, livable, multi-generational community. But since that time, we've seen housing pledges, designation of growth centers, selection of the GO station, provincial legislation in quotations to foster growth. But at what cost is this going to be Oakville? To Oakville in the long run, and we're talking a long, large process. And we've asked this question before, and I'm going to try to focus a bit more on it now. During that time, interest rates have risen and remained high. Currently, we're now starting to see housing projects delayed. We've seen several prominent developers actually failing in developments. And our concern is that Oakville has to be smart enough to manage the risk associated with a project this big. And make good decisions. Now, I noticed that infrastructure estimates for Midtown have been varied in different documents I've seen in different presentations, but I would suggest everyone would agree they're approaching $250 million now. And notwithstanding the delightful balance sheet of the town of Oakville, that's quite a bit of dinero. So thinking about that, we've got pressures on us because legislative changes mean that in the history of Oakville, growth is paid for growth. And to quote our mayor over there, that is no longer the case. And I presented the group here, I think that's going to get worse, and we have to plan for that now. We've got this 20% development charge discount in year one. We've got OLT rulings seeming to go only in one way. We've got MZOs issued on Friday afternoons with disastrous impacts. And we see in presentations that population growth estimates vary on the assumptions made. So we really have to revisit our assumptions, whatever they are, and say, this economic situation is not improving. There's some bad signs. I don't want to be apocalyptic, but look at the city of Toronto and the mess they're in, literally from overspending, and now not having the ability to deal with housing at all and begging in Ottawa after they've given up at Queen's Park. So the period from 2023 to 2050 is critical to make sure that the costs that go in the ground can be recovered through development charges. And I just was delighted this morning in a curious way. There was a fantastic article on the front page of the Globe and Mail about development charges explosions in other communities that are in bad trouble because they can't afford them. So Oakville has got the leeway of a bit of time, but this is looming as a major issue for Oakville. And remember, other communities are competing and perhaps overbuilding with Oakville to attract the same people who take the GO train and transit around Toronto. So accordingly, we're in a good situation because Oakville has been prudent, the balance sheet is solid, but this is the largest project in our history. Interest rates are high, long build-out time, and we no longer control the process as a municipality used to do 5 years ago. You know that. The rules have changed. A 30-year project, but remember, all the pipes have to go in first before they start building, and they're expensive pipes, as I understand. So the question we ask, and I will leave you with, and it's primarily directed to council, but Jacobs is here to give us some advice and other people who have other best practices. Do we have a risk management plan in effect? Is it actively looking at the current situations, not history building up to people per unit and other assumptions in growth, but what is the impact of what's actually happening now? And please, let's continue this conversation, and CMGRA would be glad to be at the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, well done. I believe, pardon me, Councillor Giddings has a question for you.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, well, thank you very much for coming out, Mr. Goodfellow and Mr. Snidel. Always happy to see you here. You have a question or some homework for us. Jim, I'd like a little homework for you. With your background, you know a thing or two about retail.
Right.
And I'd appreciate, further to some of the comments earlier on, your thoughts on the retail that was presented tonight. So when you come back next time, I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
I'd be delighted to, because I think that's critical to making this a vibrant. And by the way, in retail, what George said, that to me that includes restaurants, coffee shops, that whole sort of experience.
Certainly.
And so I'd be delighted to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our last registered delegation is Carolyn McMinn. Welcome, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to have to put my glasses on because I'm at that stage of life where I can't see anymore. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the people who've been involved in the preparation of the three options presented to us tonight. It's actually great to have some real concepts backed by some real numbers, and TCRA have actually spent some time this afternoon analysing all this prior to the meeting. I have a couple of questions for you. Firstly, can someone please provide me with a definition of what a vibrant community is and give us some relevant examples like in Toronto? Because when someone tells me vibrant, I think of neon rainbows. And I'm sure that's not what is meant. In previous iterations of the Midtown plan, the word thriving was used instead. And to me, thriving is more about, a living, breathing, healthy community. Vibrant seems to be something a little bit more esoteric. My second point is, in each of the drawings for the three concepts, the 16 Mile Creek is covered a lovely shade of green. My understanding is that this area is not included as part of Midtown, and please correct me if I am wrong. Neither is it accessible green space unless you're a mountain goat. To the uninitiated looking at these concepts, though, it appears that there is an abundance of green space available for recreation, which is not actually the case. So have the consultants, town staff or councillors ever driven past there or tried to walk there? Because if you have, you will really understand my concerns. So my other comment would then be, could we then exclude that from future slides? Because it gives us an idea that there's this beautiful, lovely, green recreational park that doesn't actually exist. One concern I do have is that none of the three concepts presented tonight acknowledges the fact that there are already at least 5 development applications submitted for Midtown. 4 of them, which are all submitted by the one developer, who are actually the landowners of these plots of land, are for tall residential towers with mixed-use retail on bottom floors of the podiums. These applications have been appealed to the OLT and are currently waiting to be heard. In totality, there are 11 towers proposed, ranging in height from 44 to 58 stories, which in theory could accommodate more than 10,000 residents, so a third of what is required by 2051. And it's on approximately 9% of the developable land of Midtown, which seems to me to be very, very dense. The proposed FSI ranges from 9 to 13.4, which is the developer's numbers. And depending on what bonuses and exemptions could potentially be granted by the OLT, we don't know where this could actually end up. So unfortunately for our consultants, these developments have actually been smack bang in some of the areas in your conceptual drawings. So in Concept A, in the mixed use and culture and shopping area, I think you find most of the towers. In Concept B, it encroaches on the educational piece as well. And then in Concept C, it encroaches on the mixed-use residential and commercial concept. So my question is, do the applications currently in progress have to adhere and adjust to these concepts presented us tonight, given that one of them will be approved going forward? Or are they subject to what was in place at the time the applications were submitted? If that's the case, it's going to render most of these concepts, well, that portion of it anyway, completely null and void, which really kind of worries me. Regarding the roads linking Midtown to the rest of Oakville, we think it's vitally important that, and I know it's something TCRA really like the idea of. It's not currently It's not currently under discussion, but we think that Chartwell Road should be extended over the QEW to 8th line and should be reconsidered because of the number of new residents that will potentially live in Midtown. Trafalgar Road is simply not going to cope. People are going to go east-west. They're also potentially going to go either north or south and through other residential areas and cheese those residents off as well. So there is the new concept of the bridge going north, which is active transportation, which is fantastic. But again, we would like you to reconsider the extension of Chartwell Road. I know it's only money. My fifth point is, where is Metrolinx in all of this? They are the majority landowner of land in Oakville, and they seem to be missing in action. They're missing from the table. What are their plans for the parcels of land they own? We would really, really like to see the transit on both sides of Trafalgar Road. That is awesome. That concept dates back to 2012, which was before I even lived in Canada. So I would question whether that is still valid, and how do we bring them to the table? My sixth point is, with the floor space index of 4 along the north side of Cornwall Road, I fail to see how 25-storey buildings will allow for integration and inclusion of the existing neighbourhoods south of Cornwall Road. It will be a visual barrier, regardless of how many sparkly retail shop fronts are located in the buildings. If you remember, a floor space index of 4 equates to a 53-storey building with the standard, I think it's 800 square metre base to it, or it might have been 800 square feet, I can't remember, but it's a 53-storey building on a 1 hectare plot of land. Or you could have a 22-storey tower on a half-hectare plot of land, which is 1.2 acres. I don't know how many of you attended Remembrance Day on Saturday. I certainly did. It held in Georgia Square, located Trafalgar Road in Sumner and Palmer. That's a 1 hectare plot of land, to give you some idea. So you could have a 153-storey tower there, which would equate to a floor space index of 4. My 7th point is, once we have agreed on the best concept for Midtown, what will protect us from over-intensification in the future? And if we look at Vaughan, and clearly Oakville is vastly different from Vaughan in many regards, but we see Vaughan is currently at 1.6 times what was originally planned, with no end in sight to development applications. The original ratio of residents to jobs was around 2.6 to 1. They are currently at 7 to 1 because no one wants to work there. And also, no one's building the office buildings that they thought they might. Instead, everyone is submitting development applications for residential towers. I think it's more profitable. So, beyond 2051, we have a projected maximum of 61,000 residents and 18,000 jobs, which is around 3.4 to 1. But this could easily change, as has happened in Vaughan. So how do we ensure that this doesn't happen? My 8th point is, and it's a little bit cheeky, but thank you for arranging the 3 public consultation meetings proposed in the coming weeks at Sheridan College and Iroquois Ridge and Walton Church. Would it be possible to schedule a 4th meeting at the Oakville Trafalgar Community Centre, the heart of the community that will be most affected by the Midtown development? And my 9th point is, last time we were at the Committee of the Whole meeting, our consultants promised us pictures of snow, like what these parks and open spaces and developments are going to look like in winter when we have snow on the ground. I'm not sure if you can find any, but that would also help. And my final point is around the parks and open spaces. Who is going to own the parks and open spaces? If it's to be the town, because I noticed there's neighbourhood parks and community parks and other parks, who's going to own and then be responsible for, and is there any budget for it? Because 13 hectares out of that, which is an awesome amount of land, and I actually think that's we're heading in the right direction. I think that's great, but I'm just concerned that the land prices have skyrocketed since we no longer have a height restriction on the buildings that can be built there. So 58 stories, from 20 stories to 58 stories, the price of land has trebled. In simple math. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Let me just get you one answer in regards to the existing applications and the impact on what's being proposed here. Mr. Garvey, can you just, I know we've raised it at council a few times, the different sort of paths that we're running on in tandem, one with the applications that are at the OLT and what we're doing here this evening and in the days ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond, Madam Chair. The applications are evaluated based on the policy framework as they were applied. I will say that this process informs our position, and we use this as evidence to formulate our opinion, which we have not given to those applications, and I would suggest that because they're applications, they don't conform to the existing policies. So this is a very important process that we're going through that we use to inform those applications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Haslett-Theo, sorry, Carolyn, she just has a quick question for you or a comment.
Thank you for crunching and going through all of this afternoon to TCRA and also to OLRA and the others. It was work today that we very much appreciated. You asked a question about what protects us from over-intensification. I want to just make sure that that is responded to as well. I know that they're going to write all these questions down and give them some, but I do think it's a question that perhaps Jacobs or Commissioner Garb can respond to.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. The protection against over-densification. So in Ontario, it's permissive land system where any person can apply for anything. So there's no guarantees that there wouldn't be applications to increase that, but the strength of our position is the strength of this process. So that while there's, on one hand, there's no guarantee by going through a process like that, we have a stronger case and more compulsion for people to conform to the policies that are developed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two individuals who already indicated they wanted to come forward. Jeffrey Pelcher, I wonder if you could come forward, and you have 10 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Am I good volume? Lovely. Just before I start, thank you so much to the consulting group. I think Mark, Lee, and Jeff, I think I got those names right, but that was incredible. And it really gives us, I think, a really good idea of what we can expect going forward. So I'm approaching this delegation as someone in a group that I think has been significantly underrepresented in the talks so far, and that is the people who don't already own homes. I mean, I've heard quite a lot from homeowners associations, but honestly, I feel a little bit underrepresented because Midtown, in a lot of ways, is a direct response to the housing crisis. I'm 23. I live in Ward 2 with my parents. And that is because I just cannot afford a home. And that is the case for almost everybody in my generation. And I care about Midtown because it represents hope for affordable homes for my generation, but within my lifetime as well. It's exciting for the future of Oakville, and I love seeing the shopping districts and the potential for such a rich culture in the area. But again, my focus is really where am I going to live in the next 5 years? And I kind of look at Midtown as like, if this can happen, there's hope that this can change. And with this, I think there should be a big emphasis on getting young people to have a say in Midtown, because it really is for them. The time horizon is 2050, and I mean, that's when I am probably going to have maybe a 15-year-old kid in Midtown. And that person, I hope, doesn't have to face a housing crisis, but this really is what Midtown's there to address. And young people should have a say in it. And so I really like the emphasis on the public consultations, because that's always important. And when I was there last time, I saw lots of young people as well who were engaged and wanted to add ideas to the development. But I think the emphasis really should be with young people. And just on the concept specifically, I was really impressed by concept A. Specifically that it looks like, from what I saw in the diagram, that every residential space has parks within the area, within walking distance, which I think is amazing. I think the office spaces are pretty cool. I mean, as somebody who's a remote worker right now, if my office looked like that, I would go into the office for sure. And I mean, I could work in Toronto at some point, right? But I mean, that green space is incredible. And so really where someone works and where someone can live is the type of community that we want to make, right? We want to make somewhere where, you know, if I live somewhere to walk to work and I can see the people that I work with because I live with them in Midtown, right? So I think that's incredible. And I was really happy to see that. Just on the sort of financial questions that I noticed that were brought up tonight by councilors and delegates, what I like to see with this is the higher density transit-oriented developments, and I read a study on this last week, they typically perform better in this economy with high interest rates and where developments seem to be harder to get. And the reason for that is that people just love them. They buy them and they sell out so fast. I think in Mississauga, an example that they brought up in the last committee of the whole meeting, 95% of their units were bought as soon as the development was put up. And that was because it was next to transit-oriented development with green space, and it's just a place where people want to live. And so I hope that we have that all throughout Midtown. And the most important part of that is that higher density apartments and such are more affordable for people in my generation because we might not have cars in the future where we're going to need to have 2 cars for family. If I'm able to walk to work and cycle to everything I need, I don't necessarily need to store my car somewhere. So I love the emphasis on the higher density aspects of Midtown, where it's going. I love the concept A. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we're going to see at the next committee of the whole meeting. But I just wanted to address that as someone young, I think is underrepresented, and that I'm very passionate about this, and I really hope to see those changes put forward. So, thank you.
We thank you for your passion as well and your commitment to the process. And I think as the previous delegate had spoken, I think it's important to be mindful of the target audience that you're trying to attract to the area. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next delegate is Matthias De Silva. And you have 10 minutes.
Hello, hello. Good night, Council. Holy, you're tall. Oh, there we go. I apologize for that. Well, to start, I would like to say that I'm Matthias. I've been living in Oakville for almost an entire decade now, and that it's a wonderful city. I absolutely love living here. It's a life-changing experience for sure, and I definitely feel like that we're leading the suburbs around us as one of the best places to live. I would first start to like to address Midtown as a necessary project for the sustainability of Oakville as not only a city, but also as a place where people can live responsibly, affordably, and just have a better quality of life. So I do want to thank the consultants here for doing a wonderful job with the feedback and all of these public meetings with the public to answer questions and everything. I feel like that's an absolutely fantastic thing. Before I get into my points about Midtown, I would like to just address a couple of concerns being brought up earlier tonight, specifically about towers, right? Yes, towers are pretty scary. They're tall, they're like, they overshadow everything. However, I think it is ultimately necessary to understand that the reason why towers must be built is because Oakville has completely failed in providing missing middle housing for the past decades, and which ultimately made the house demand incredibly high for such a short supply. And what we're experiencing right now is only a byproduct of our negligence of housing in the past few decades. So yes, there are better options than towers. There are low-story buildings, multifamily homes, and multiplexes like seen in Europe and Montreal. However, we're too late for that, so we're gonna have to deal with what we get. I also saw some comments about air quality, and I do find it quite interesting how the first development in the past few decades that we've seen in Oakville that actually supports a sustainable lifestyle without car or driving, right, where people get to walk and cycle and take electric public transit to work and from work, is seen as a negative impact into the air quality of the region. I find that concern to be extremely misunderstood and just completely misses the mark of what Midtown is trying to achieve. The reason why the air quality in our region is so poor is because there is no viable option than to drive. Everybody drives. All of the streets are congested, meaning that our air quality is incredibly poor. And it is incredibly important that we address that. And guess what? The way that we can address it is by providing transit-oriented, mixed-use, high-density housing, which is exactly what is happening here. I also like to say that, again, there were a lot of concerns about emissions and greenhouse gases. And yes, again, those are a concern because people drive all the time. So providing a development where people don't need to own a car is absolutely necessary, and it is quite disappointing that we haven't done so in the past few decades, but again, it is an opportunity that we must take advantage of. And I feel like that, my last point before I get into Midtown, I apologize, is that there's a lot of pushback for Midtown by folks that, like previous delegates mentioned, are not the target audience of Midtown. And I feel like there needs to be some empathy here related to the younger generation, the affordability of housing and just freedom of living, right? A lot of us won't have the money to afford a single-family home, and a lot of us just simply do not want to own a car. We're not saying that we need to ban single-family homes or ban driving. All we're wanting is an option, right? So the entirety of Oakville is devoted to single-family homes and to driving cars. Why can't we have a couple of acres of land where we get to live how we want? Does Oakville not want young people? Is the expectation for us to move somewhere else? Because that's what it feels like right now, especially with the pushback to this project. Anyway, I would like to say that the Midtown project is once again tuning in a very good direction. The emphasis on accessibility for all modes of transportation is incredibly wonderful to see. And the extra emphasis on the accessibility of all means are incredibly exciting to see as well. I like to say that the concept A provided was absolutely wonderful to see. All of those amenities in walking distance, cycling distance is something that we should really see more around Oakville. And most importantly, I cannot wait for the next public consultation meetings where we get to see and have an idea of what this new heart of the town will become in the future. To close out my thoughts, I would just like to reinforce some of my points, which is that Oakville is a wonderful city. And for it to lead in Halton as the best city to live, the best town to live in, we need to take into consideration affordability and sustainability. And Midtown is the gateway to a future sustainable city. And I hope that folks around town support this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming out, Mr. De Silva. Look forward to seeing you at future meetings. Yes, Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Hello.
First, let me say thank you very much for coming out. And I really appreciated the fact that you talked about sustainability and really some of those implications that hadn't been raised, which is great. And I do hope you realize that some of the folks that are speaking have young adults, as do individuals at this table. So it is near and dear to our hearts that our children be able to find and afford some form of home, hopefully closer to home than far away. So continue to speak up and continue to participate. What I would like to understand is you talk about affordability, and it's a very difficult conversation because everybody views it differently. So is it your impression that these are going to be priced at a point that you see as affordable? And could I be so bold as to say, what do you think that is?
Oh, absolutely. Well, usually, right, in places around the world, a more densely packed city is a city in which units are more affordable, homes are more affordable, and that's usually due to the fact that density is spread across the entire town, meaning that mostly of a town is multiplexes, small 4 to 5 stories, units which are incredibly cheap to maintain compared to tall towers. And that is for sure a concern, but it's more of a Canada-wide situation. But matter of the fact is that without the shadow of doubt, that even if it's not the most optimal outcome, a more dense environment where people can live with less and just simply not have to worry about all other costs that come with living in a single-family home. It's not only the high price, but just the owning and maintaining a vehicle, right? In a neighborhood like that, you are innately gonna be in an environment that is more affordable because you are not reliant on a car, and also because smaller units are more affordable. But again, it's the missing middle point that I was bringing, which is a little bit disappointing to not have seen in the past few decades. However, again, I feel like Midtown is nothing is perfect, right? So, and we can go back and change what we did. So Midtown is the perfect start for that affordable housing, maybe some more multiplexes and low-rise buildings across Oakville to drive home that availability and affordability.
So thank you for that. And you do raise that there are other ways to infill that we have to see. And I won't hold you to a number, but I would say that these are not going to be easily affordable based on what we're seeing. Paying closer to $750,000 is in my books not very affordable when I think about what my kids are earning right today. But we hear the message that everything we can do to create some level of what they would call more attainable. And you're right, lose the car, and there's certainly more money in your pocketbook. So thanks very much.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Knoll, I think he has a question for you as well, Mr. De Silva. Sorry.
No worries about it.
Thank you very much for your delegation, and I've really appreciated the feedback you've given us now a couple times, and that of Mr. Belcher before you. It's really interesting to get a young person's perspective on the future. I have 5 kids, only one lives in Oakville, and that's the one that lives in my house. And it's not by choice. They can't afford to live in Oakville too, so I sympathize with your concern. And my 23-year-old, I hope you're listening. Anyway, no, we love him anyway. The question I have for you is, how do we actually get to young people and get their point of view across? Like, you and Mr. Belcher make about 80% of the feedback from young people at delegation. I'm exaggerating a bit, but the reality is that it's difficult to get to young people who are our target audience, obviously, because you are the folks who are going to be inheriting. Excuse me, I just went dry. You're the folks who are going to be inheriting this. How do we get to you and your, obviously we've gotten to you, how do we get to your peers to get them engaged?
That is a very good question. And in fact, I feel like there is a lot of, at least from my circle and for the people that I know, there's a lot of people that are indeed invested in these sorts of changes and being part of the community. They simply don't either have the time or they don't have they lack the courage to show up and speak up, right? And I feel like the most optimal way to get young people involved and to speak their mind is to become a little bit more involved with social media and the internet. It is the means to which a lot of young people communicate and find out about things around them. I personally found out about Midtown via an email, right? So, but I think that most importantly, I feel like that perhaps just directly target them and insist that young people in Oakville, we want to hear your voice, show up to this meeting, and we want to hear you, and we want to see what you think, because I think a lot of the time people find it intimidating to show up to council and make comments. So I feel like the key point is to simply make it more friendly and more accessible in that way. Not that it isn't, but
we're friendly,
people,
aren't we?
Sorry?
We're friendly, aren't we?
You're absolutely friendly.
Okay,
But yeah, don't worry about it.
and how? And when you talk to your peers about this, are you finding there's a general level of interest in this topic, or are you unique in your peer group? Do you feel?
So I've attended high school in Oakville, and I'm still friends with most of my friends from high school, and all of them have a universal agreement. A lot of them would vastly prefer a lifestyle like is offered in Midtown, and they express these sorts of concerns amongst themselves. They just don't really come to council and speak about it. So, but at least to my experience, my personal experience, the people around me seem to be very interested in projects like these, and even see future developments around other GO stations like Brontigo.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for those comments. I mean, I'd like to give you some homework.
Absolutely.
Could you go out and pass the word that we are a friendly bunch? And
you got it.
Yeah, and we certainly want to hear, and I'll make a particular effort to smile. But we really want to hear more from you and your colleagues, or your peers, to get more perspective from that demographic.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for the bravery, although I don't understand that, but thanks for the bravery to speak to us.
Thank you so much for listening. I apologize for rambling.
And just so you know, for those who aren't comfortable, and that's an understandable point of view, they can certainly submit their written comments at any time, and they would be welcomed. I got Councillor Z who wants to speak as well. Councillor McNeese after that.
Madam Chair. I don't have a question for you, but I do have some comments. So I really appreciate, thank you for your delegation, and appreciate you present a group of a young generation. So you mentioned that those affordable ability here in Oakville. So we don't want to leave. So we want to stay, and we want to have the generation, the young people like you, we want to work together to make our community better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor McNeese.
Thank you, through you, Chair Dudek, and thanks again for your delegation and fielding so many questions today. So talking about affordability, one approach is that if we flood the market with units, the market forces will take over, and it may or may not be affordable. We don't always see that happen. Burlington's going through a similar process with their MTSAs as we are, and have a similar mandate from the province. They're designating their MTSAs as protected MTSAs, which give them more tools to ensure affordability. What they're also doing is doing the official plan amendment, which is what we're doing with the community planning permit bylaw, which is gives them the tools to create targets around affordability. So I'm just looking at one right now, and what they consider Class A applications, which is for ownership units or condominium units. They've set targets, so 15% or higher of units have to be attainable. So through a housing strategy, you define what that is. 7% have to be moderately affordable, and 2% have to be deeply affordable. So I would love to see, and not just directed at you, but just the staff and the consultants, some conversations around what are the tools that we can do to help achieve this, because market forces alone, I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean, the old saying is you keep driving away from Toronto until you can start to afford it. That's not what I'm hearing you want to do. You want to stay local and be a part of a vibrant community. So I'd love to start having conversations on how we can make that happen. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Council. Thank you for hearing.
Okay. I'm going to poll the audience to see if there's any, yes, you can, and shortly thereafter, you first. And if you could just come forward and give your name for the clerk. Thank you very much, and you have 10 minutes.
I think you're a tough act to follow. Mine's quick. Thank you for your presentation. It was excellent. It's so nice to see a visual and really get a good sense of what is where, and it was nice to see the green space. I guess I'm just a visual learner, but I've been looking at buildings now a lot more and counting the stories on them because I really want to see how big is a 59-story building. So what I noticed in the pictures that were shown at the info night that you guys had a week and a half ago or so, there were no 50 to 59 story pictures of 50 to 59 story buildings. So just to put it into perspective, the Maryland buildings in Mississauga, those two huge towers that you can see from clear across the city, those are 50 stories high. One is 50 and one's 54. They're massive, and they just would, to me, seem alien in Oakville. It's just not the flavor of this town, and they're just too damn big. And then when you think about 60,000 people moving in there, I really, really worry about the hospital. But again, I was trying to get a perspective because none of the pictures show 60,000 people milling around this little bit of an area. So the Rogers Center has 53,000 seats. So this would be more people than are in the Rogers Center when it's full. Or the Scotiabank Arena, if you've seen a Leafs game lately, fits 19,800 people in it. So it's like putting 3 Scotiabank arenas in this little bit of space. It's just too many people. It just is. People, there's just not enough space for everybody. As for the points, and the one thing I didn't notice in the pictures were any community centers. So there were stars saying schools could go here or go there, but we know that's never a guarantee that a school is going to be built, so that's a concern. But I didn't see any community centers, so I worry about recreation for people, especially in the winter when you can't ride your bike anywhere. People need places to go to play, pickleball, badminton. And as for the air quality isn't, somebody mentioned that it's because there's too many cars here. I would question that. I think, as a sailor, it has something to do with the way the wind blows into where we are on Lake Ontario. I think it has something more to do with that. And it gives us favorable weather, but it's something to do with the wind shift. I wish another sailor was here and could tell me, because they would know. And affordability, I don't think going from 20 stories to 59 stories is going to make much of a difference in the cost of, I know simple economics would say that it does, but I don't think it will, not in this area. Look at the huge towers in Vaughan, Toronto, Mississauga, and they're still pretty expensive and they're super high. But yeah, 60,000 people is going to cause a lot of pollution, water pollution, garbage. That's a lot of garbage generated by a lot of people. So environmentally, it's just too many people. That's it.
Thank you very much. And I wonder, sorry, could you just say your name for the record?
Oh, Liz Galvin.
Liz? Is it? Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yes, gentleman who indicated over there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Council. To the Jacobs Group, excellent presentation. It gave us a lot of varied options, 3 tonight, which is great. I guess I have a main concern is, and this doesn't have to be answered tonight because I'm not just sure what the status is, the area at Kerr Street and Spears where there was a proposal of about 11, I believe 9 to 11 buildings of up to 28 stories, was put on hold, last time I heard, was put on hold because of the underpass at Kerr Street railroad tracks was not going to be funded by Metrolinx. Is that correct?
No, actually, there was a decision not to approve it based on, from some of us on council, that we were concerned that Metrolinx was not coming forward with the promise for the underpass at the current time. It's currently at the Ontario Land Tribunal because the owners have appealed that decision.
Okay.
So yes.
So what's, I guess the main thing that I'm concerned about is if that's on hold and if Metrolinx is sort of unsure whether they're going to fund that, the main problem is that new artery that's going to go through where the Humane Society is, that's going to go also underneath the tracks. That's a major artery that's going to basically make or break this whole development. And we have to get, as a delegate mentioned earlier, we need Metrolinx at the table to decide just where we stand with all this. Are they going to fund this? Because if they're not, this sort of backtracks the whole process. I like the fact that there's green space mentioned as well, because it gives Councillor Giddings extra space to build rinks, and I think we all look forward to that. For those not aware, for the skating rinks in the winter. Back to the area that comes off Cornwall and goes under the tracks. In each of those presentations, of the 3 presentations, there's 2 baseball diamonds on Cornwall. It's, I believe, Cornwall Park. Those were actually blanked out as areas for 45-story buildings, and I was just wondering if that was a mistake or if that's something in the process. Because you'll see in each of the diagrams it shows it closed out as a development for 45 stories.
Okay, I might be mistaken. I thought it was shown as green space.
No, it wasn't. Not in the three plans for the height and density, it wasn't.
Okay, can we get an answer?
So I'd like to see a change in that.
No, that's okay.
Yep. Or at least clarified
This is
anyway.
exactly what it's all about, clarity.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I'm just concerned too with that same area where the Humane Society is, if that's going to be wide enough for a 2-lane road with the sidewalks and infrastructure that's going to be with that, unless Longo's is going to leave, and something's going to happen with that baseball park. So something to be of concern as well. A delegate also mentioned the sort of sloping down effect, if you like, of the height from highest near the highway down towards the lake, which I think is a fabulous idea. I thought about that when the presentation was going on. They beat me to it, which is great because there's more consensus. I like that idea. Too many high-end story buildings in Toronto and other municipalities are what I call sort of a domino effect, where they promise these fantastic multi-million-dollar views of the city or the lake, and then 1 or 2 years later, another building goes up and completely blocks that view. So I think the idea of building the higher buildings closer to the highway, which also gives less shadow to the southeast residents, and also is more of a sound barrier with the highway and all that traffic. I think a lot of the traffic that are going to be at that in those taller buildings are probably going to be office, which in presentation C showed a lot of the office buildings in and around that highway area, which I think is conducive to a lot of the traffic coming off the highway and going straight to those areas. So I think that's something that should be considered as well. And yeah, I just think I think we're making progress. Thank you.
Can I get your name for the record,
Yes, it's
please?
Todd Milligan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have any further speakers? Yes, gentleman there, and then the one beside. Thank you very much, and then I'll get you after. And if you can just provide your name for the clerk for the record.
I'm Neil Westall. I live in the JCRA catchment area. First of all, thank you to Jacob for what I think are 3 wonderful sets of options. I'm sure we can come up with something in there. I'm very impressed that they have listened to the previous information and integrated it into what we see now. I can't wait to see the next one. My question is a very simple one. I've been appropriately impressed with all the other delegations who've dealt with deeply important issues. Mine is much more simple. What is green space? Because they're marked as green on the map. How much of it is concrete? Is this actually what it looks like, or is it not what it looks like? That's my only comment. Thank you.
It's a valuable question. Thank you. Yes, sir, if you'd like to come forward, please. And then I saw a hand over here in the aisle, and I'll get that after. Thank you.
My name is Michael Johnson, Johnson for the clerk.
Thank you.
Just a couple of small points. First is we haven't had any delegations for the area just north of the QEW, the Kent Garden, and over towards 6th Line and the creek. And looking at the plans that have been shown to us today, that seems to be where some of the tallest buildings are, 45 plus 50 stories, one of the higher FSIs. That's an area that is really, I don't think, once you get past Trafalgar Road, you are looking at almost solid single-family dwellings and a lot of bungalows still. That's going to be affected if you have these multi-story towers just on the other side of the QEW. It's going to be shadows. It's going to be air pollution. So I think that the idea you can't just look at one side of the town. You have to look at both sides of the town. And maybe the real solution, and this comes out of the figures that were given us, I think we should be looking at what are we required to build by 2051? Because we have no guarantees as to what's going to happen. In the idea of these mixed uses, if you look at Toronto, the office towers are empty. They are begging for tenants. We have no guarantee that we are going to be able to attract office businesses that are going to take up those spaces. And the other thing about a tall condo building is that if they're south of the QEW, well, obviously all those top stories have such a lovely lake view. And what do you think is going to happen to the prices of all those units, especially if they're on the south side? Unfortunately, you can't say, if you build it, they will come, because we cannot guarantee that they will come. There may be other competing municipalities who can offer more or have other things that, you know, will attract people who we were thinking would come here. I think as long as the closer you are to Toronto, the more you are going to have high-end rents and high-end condo fees. So we're not really guaranteeing affordable housing. I think we have to look at other ways of having affordable housing, and I don't think that these condo buildings really are the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your delegation.
You're welcome. Any questions?
Thank you. Yes, I saw somebody. Yes, if you'd like to come forward, please. And please identify yourself for the clerk. Thank you.
My name is Jane Huddleston. I just have a question. All of the three concepts that we saw have all of the different categories on what is now the Metrolinx existing surface parking. Do we now know that Metrolinx is giving up that land?
Mr. Garby?
Through you, Madam Chair, we plan regardless of ownership, and so they've not committed to changing their plans, but over time, we're trying to engage Metrolinx to see what their future plans are, but we plan regardless of what's there currently.
So this public feedback on the three concepts is meaningless if the land is not available.
Through you, maybe I could rephrase. The land is privately held. We quote unquote privately. It's a public ownership. However, we put plans in place so as those areas transition, there is a vision and direction for those lands to be used. So while today many of the there's much of the land that's occupied by McDonald's or retail stores, over time they'll transition out of that use to something else. And so the exercise we're conducting now is to cast vision beyond the current use of today.
But if the GO station is there, it will not cease to require parking.
I think from what I've seen, they're anticipating providing it on the east side as well will free things up as well. Is that not correct? To sort of disperse the...
I think what we've seen across the GO network and across other transit organizations, the form changes. So so if it's surface lot turns into parking lots that are buried, and you build above it. Metrolinx has a program where they examine opportunities for what we call air rights, which is building over transit infrastructure. So over time, and as the plans evolve from Metrolinx and the needs of the community evolve, the form of the parking changes, the demand for parking changes, all those things factor into how land uses evolve towards the vision that is being painted by the committee.
So we have three concepts to choose from that are all dependent upon something happening that may never happen.
I guess technically that's true. We don't force anyone to do anything, but what we do is cast vision many years into the future. So something may or may not happen, but we have a plan in place as things change. You think back over the course of history, many things have changed for the town of Oakville and for its residents. So we put plans in place for the future, and it takes longer for some uses to change than others, but we have the plans in place to deal with the transition.
Would it not be a good idea to have at least one concept to look at for the public consultation that does not rely on something that may never happen?
Thank you for that comment. I think we'll take that back. It's
Thank
a
you.
valuable point. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
Yes. Would you like to come forward? And as indicated, just provide your name for the record, please.
Yes, I'm Talia Gonzalez. Thank you, counselors and everyone. And so just to do like a broad sort of statement, I really like the plan for Midtown. I think it's very good, especially as like a member of the younger generation and stuff. Specifically like the third option, when I saw it kind of sort of the plan for it, just like on the screen, I thought it looked very good and I was very excited for it. As a sort of suggestion, I guess, for being able to get more people of the younger generation here, I would maybe suggest putting sort of advertisements where a lot of the younger generation not specifically hang out, but kind of congregate. So a very big example would maybe be the Sheridan sort of like bus stop. I see a lot of people there just sort of waiting for their buses, specifically looking at like when their buses are gonna come or not. And I feel like maybe putting like a couple of advertisements and such there, maybe a QR code or something for like a survey, or maybe just something there to sort of indicate that there is a meeting going to happen, would maybe get more people who are kind of closer to the area to go to these sorts of meetings, or something like community centers or like the library. Yeah.
Great suggestions. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to restrict the matter to table for questions from council and the committee. Councillor Elgar, you were first, and then it's Councillor Adams.
Thank you, through your Chair. Thank you to Jacobs for the presentation. We were able to get it this afternoon, so I had a bit of time to go through it ahead of time. As I went through it, I was mostly pleased with some of the other areas you referred to in your pictures about sizing. I found when you talked about Kendall Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and what shocked me when I drilled that down a little bit, they had a map which showed what was in this area, like in their area now, like whether it be the GO train or Canadian Tire or Home Depot or whatever, and then they overlaid it, and they did it in such a way you could tell by shade of color what was allowed there. And their maximum height was 300 feet, and it started out at 30 feet. And they also then, the next step was what they were putting there. And I thought, this is what the people can actually envision. Like FSI, you can play with that and people, they'll kind of get it. And we were fortunate enough to have last night a few hours talking about our parks plan for 2031. And in our parks plan, they used a beautiful 5 FSI. And when you start calculating it out, they're saying if you go 5 FSI and 75% is residential, the rest is retail and commercial, this is what you are allowed to get for park space that they have to give. And I thought, between the two consulting groups, we've got some data here now that can really help everyone. And I'm not sure whether, Jacobs, you've looked at the master plan, because the other thing that bothers me is you talking about the parks. And you used the term, I believe, what do you call them? Civic parks and community parks. In our parks plan, we've got suburban parks, district parks, neighborhood parks, parkettes, urban parks, urban squares, promenades, connecting links, pocket parks, and sliver parks, with a definition of each one, but there was nothing on a civic park or a community park. And I'm wondering whether you can kind of tighten that up so we're kind of walking the same way, no matter who's doing it. It'd really be appreciated. Also, the number of acres that, well, in the US it's acres, people still relate to it here. We're into hectares, where we've got each one of these colors, by each one, if we can actually put in what that is of a hectare, how many hectares, it would really help. Because some of these green lines in here, I suspect are sliver parks, and they're like, you know, it's a little walkway. And the community links and pocket parks, they have to be minimum 75 square meters, and it can be green, but they have to be 7.5 meters along a road, so it's only 10 feet wide, or 10 meters. It's pretty interesting when you start digging into the details. But because we got it this afternoon, I was able to look at all of this. And all the other places you referred to also, it was shocking of how big some of these places you showed us in the States were. But the one that got me the most was Cambridge, and there's FS, really, if you think about it, 5 FSI probably is about 30 stories, I'm thinking, ballpark there. And that's one of the ones you're using, and I'm hoping we can use that, and it scales it down all the way along, down to 30 feet is where they go, which would help the people on the south side where you have single-family houses. But also, if you could just at the beginning of every presentation, what is a hectare, a square hectare, 10,000 square meters? You know, does it mean much to people? I do feel if you're talking to the public, we should be doing everything about, here's the size of a football field. A football field is 100, everybody knows 100 yards long, about 58 yards wide. And then you roll it back and you get into, well, how big is that? That's really, think about it as 1.1 acre, or it's 0.445 hectares. So every time, if they can envision a football field, they can envision what you're trying to tell them. Because, you know, we won't be around, in a lot of us in 30, 40 years' time probably, but they'll probably be blaming us if we don't do this right up front. So I just hope you can give the people more information. The lady talking about the GO train, excellent point. And that's why when they did it, they actually showed what was under everything, and then shades of color for colors and for height and density, and what was going there, whether it be residential or commercial. So I know it may be a lot of work to do, but I think it'll pay off in spades as we go forward. So those are really, my questions are, I hope, can you do that before it goes to the public for consultation? Is it possible?
Yes, okay. Through you, Madam Chair. The content that's been presented tonight will be the content that goes out. I mean, we're barely 2 weeks to the public, and we're well advanced in terms of preparing materials to bring it out to them. But we really do take your commentary in terms of articulating what we're trying to communicate as clearly as possible. And as the policy framework gets more refined, that additional level of detail, and I would be very open to looking at the document that seems to have captured your attention, so we can see and understand how that's communicated and how we could potentially think about how future communication of our concepts can get that far. But the level of detail that Mark communicated tonight will be what is brought to the community.
Well, I appreciate that. And nowadays with the internet, it's pretty easy to drill down pretty good, because I'd never been to Kendall Park, I must say, and some of the other places I thought, wow, they're way bigger than I thought. But what was the best is they're way lower than I thought too, like 300 feet. That's maximum. So I hope we can do it, because I think the people that are here and speaking, and all the other people too, will appreciate knowing what might be coming. So thanks very much, and that was the better presentation I felt I've ever seen here, because you gave me examples that I can dig into. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Thanks very much. I've got 3 questions. The first one is, in the active transportation slide that you've got, it doesn't show the east side crossing over the QEW, which has been part of our Midtown EA program for some time. And I wondered what happened to it, and should it be put back, or what's going on with it?
Through you, Chair. I think you're referring to the active transportation path just on the east side of the Trafalgar, on where the highway ramps are.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I think through our transportation master plan, we'll be looking, or transportation plan for Midtown specifically, we'll be looking at that in a bit more detail. I think the previous iterations, the intent for that path was to look at it as a connection to the station as it moved to the east side. Because that's a bit in flux, we're looking at that a bit deeper before we bring that out to the public. So right now, it's sort of something that we're internally considering. It's not something that's off the table. It's not something that we're for sure having. It's just something that we're evaluating and we're going through the process.
Okay, so that's something that comes up regularly in conversations with my constituents, is the need for better, stronger, active transportation crossings into the Midtown area. Yeah. And so the fact that it's not there, not talked about as part of the consultation process is a bit problematic to me.
Yeah, so if I can bring up this slide.
So I'm looking at slide 22 or page 22 of the 56-page deck, which is part of the common concepts elements, and so it doesn't show up there. I'll leave that with you. I don't think there's any more to be said about it really tonight. My second question is, in a number of the concept drawings, there are education spaces. And I wondered if we could get a better understanding about what's visioned for that. And there's discussion about, does that, I'm assuming that somehow means some kind of university or college kind of space, but it's really not clear about what the intention is there.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, Councillor Adams, the notion is, over the longer term, could you land a post-secondary educational institution in Midtown? There is always a very strong relationship between post-secondary education and employment generation and the next generation of innovators, problem solvers, and workers. And so that is the notion. That could start out small. Many institutions have a need for student housing. And as you know, Sheridan, for example, is just up the road on Trafalgar Avenue. Over the longer term, there is a higher order transit system that's proposed on Trafalgar that could immediately link Sheridan to Midtown. So there's a really interesting opportunity to potentially explore. And what else could that generate in terms of Sheridan or other post-secondary institutions being creative about wanting a space here? They would make an excellent tenant in the base of an office building, for example. So those kinds of opportunities could most definitely be explored through your economic development department. It starts to make the plan and its attributes much more rich.
Okay, so it's a very conceptual thing, and from a planning perspective, we can conceptually talk about it, but from a planning perspective, is that something that in the world of Ontario provincial planning, is that something that we could write into an official plan and have any kind of hope of being able to hold to it?
In terms of writing that into an official plan, I will turn to my planning colleague, Lee.
We're a design and planning firm.
And I'd be happy to have that kind of institution, taking hold there. I'm just trying to figure out how do you make that happen, and from a planning perspective, what do you have to do?
So through you, Madam Chair, in educational focus and office focus or retail focus, all of those types of things can be articulated in policy. The degree to which we can define it is, as you've rightly mentioned, something that will need to be precise about in the language. But I would suggest that a highly prescriptive language about, this shall be an educational institution is likely something that wouldn't hold water at the tribunal, but rather we can explore different types of requirements for non-residential uses and then be explicit about what range of uses that would include. And it's a layered approach. So at the precinct level, we're wherever we land with the concept. At the precinct level, we're describing this precinct has this character and this type of thing in it, whether that's retail, in this case, an educational focus, so that you have integrated kind of language from each one of your policy statements that can reinforce what it is that you want, and that's backed up with at the most fine-grained a requirement for some type of use. So there's policy approaches to do it, but it is a sensitive policy issue and something that we'll have to craft pretty carefully at the end of the day.
Okay, that's really fascinating. My last question is, there's 3 concepts here. Which might support the least expensive form of housing? Which one would provide the most affordable housing? And I use the term in a broad sense, not in the technical terminology of planning down at the province, perhaps. But which one would do that and why? What is it that the general public, if the general public found that we need more attainable housing, and we heard that from a number of delegates tonight, what is it that we should be looking for in these designs to help support that outcome?
So through you, Madam Chair, each one of the concepts produces the same yield. So there is no difference in terms of the amount of housing that's estimated to come out of each one of the concepts. And as we established before, the level of detail that these concepts go into don't provide any differences in terms of this type of affordability approach or that type of affordability approach. The yields in each one of the concepts are the same. And so really the question is about what tools does the municipality have at its disposal to extract affordable housing out of development. And those are things that we'll go into as we continue through this process, but inclusionary zoning is one of those, but that requires a framework to be established by the municipality to do that. And then there's also limitations on what can be extracted in terms of affordability. So that's a legislated way to get affordable housing out of a development. And then, there's other things happening at the provincial level in terms of potential changes to the PPS and the growth plan and new definitions of affordable or attainable housing that we'll have to be mindful of as those come forward. But to specifically answer your question, there isn't a difference between the concepts in terms of which delivers more affordable housing. That is a different kind of policy approach and different types of tools that the municipality has at its disposal.
So there are tools that are out there that allow us to move that lever a little bit to the left or the right, so to speak. We've got choices here about how much land is at different FSIs, might have different levels of height, might have different levels of mixed use, those kinds of things. In the world of planning, do any of those generate homes that are less expensive to acquire than others?
I would think that the outcome is highly dependent on any individual, landowner's pro forma and what they desire to build out of those lands. A very general greater densities may afford greater mixes of uses or mixes of unit types within a development because you're cross-subsidizing yourself, if you will. So higher density projects sometimes are able to support additional affordable units within them because that helps make the developers' pro formas work.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to say thank you to Mark and Lee and Jeff, as well as Neil and town staff, because it's really great to start seeing, being able to visualize and kind of what the art of the possible is. I think one of the delegates, Mr. Goodfellow, asked the question, what are the criteria to evaluate the concepts? So I'm not sure if you can go into maybe some of those steps, because there are landowners and developers and Metrolinx and others who would weigh in on this, but as we are hearing from the public, is it weighted criteria? Is it environment over affordability? How is that going to be further refined? Because I think, as Councillor Elger mentioned, we're actually now seeing concepts of this happening in other locations. One example about parking, I was in Kingston at Queen's University, across from Kingston General. The parking for Kingston General is under a field and, you know, multi-level down, there's parking, but there's a playing field above. So, you know, those are examples that I think we could maybe potentially bring out as concepts here. And I think in San Francisco, where we had the bus storage, you would never know that was something because it looked like a form of art, but it's actually really functional. So anyway, that's just my question, but great work. I think we're really starting to refine this, and thank you to the delegates who brought forward some really great concepts, ideas, and feedback. I think this is really important in the purpose of this committee of the whole, so thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to repeat all the thank yous, but I'll just say ditto and save some time, because this is a really good presentation, and the work that's been done so far is great. I have some questions about retail, and first a bit of a preamble to lead up to that. Been around the table for a long time, seen a lot of development applications, and there's always wonderful illustrations of all the wonderful retail that's going to come in. And there's, you know, all these wonderful vistas of small shops and boutiques and cafes, and they rarely ever do. And I'm concerned that in the changing face, and you did address the issue of the changing face of office space, which is a real significant issue right now post-pandemic. There's been a real shift in retail as well. We've seen an unprecedented number of well-known brands go bankrupt. More and more people are focusing on e-commerce, and retailers, and even restaurants for that matter, are really struggling to survive. So I guess my concern is, how are we going to make sure we are reasonable and realistic as to what the expectations are around retail, and create an environment where we have the floor plates and such that are necessary, because that's often not possible in these kind of areas. And I look to the Uptown Core as an example. When the Uptown Core was originally considered, part of the sales job to council was this immense shopping district with small boutiques and bookstores and cafes, and we have a lot of nail salons. A lot of nail salons and dentists, actually. No offense to nail salon or dentist operators. So how do we create an environment where that's feasible? Have you studied this area sufficiently with the prognosticators of the retail sector? But also, we're probably really early for this. Is there some language that can be put in some of these materials, or some of this legislation that has to go into place to make sure that the developers don't simply abandon their retail immediately when they realize, oh, I can't rent this in the first 6 months, and then it ends up being, nail salons and hairdressers. So I think it's a very important aspect of the vibrancy of community life in this potential development, and I'd hate to see it squandered or not adequately protected or studied.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for that commentary. And absolutely, retail is a really important piece of a vibrant community or a thriving community that includes all of the types of uses that people need to have to support their day-to-day lives, which go beyond nail salons. So in terms of the feasibility, that's something that we've been trying to benchmark, as we've come through the concepts, is looking at other communities around the same size and how much retail per square feet per person they include, and that type of thing. And that research is ongoing. And we also have the benefit of having in the broader team other consultants that we can draw upon through Jacobs to help us with that kind of broad understanding about just the overall quantum and how we're estimating that. So that's kind of on the big picture element. But we also understand, where the market is at today and the challenges that developers have in delivering things. But also there's that balance too. There's some developers that are very interested in delivering larger format retail. It's a large part of how they work, and we don't want to preclude those opportunities. There's great examples of big box stores in downtown Toronto that are in buildings, right? And that may be the appropriate type of format to think about some of the, a Canadian Tire, for instance, and those types of things that are still serving a large need for communities. So how do we do that in the policy? I think similar, to the questions asked before about the education uses, retail we're far more familiar with, and we use in policy very frequently to require, not just encourage, but require certain amounts of active retail frontage or retail at grade or a certain percentage of lower floors of development. And then we can also be clear in the enabling language language that it's not just a, a ground floor, or there's maybe if we end up with that retail kind of focus district, that there's a description of that we anticipate larger floor plate types of things and that kind of thing, so that we're open to and encouraging development to come forward with those types of ideas. So, so we do have the opportunity to work with the language to prescribe those things and to do it in a way to, as you pointed out, that's reasonable, right? That can be defendable. So when, should we have to defend, policies at the OLT, that we have, a retail expert or commercial expert standing right next to the policy expert that's able to say, yes, this is a good policy because, right? So we want to have that embedded.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
Councillor McNeice.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I heard mention from the consultant the Trafalgar rapid transit possibility in the future. And looking through the diagrams in the presentation, we talk about the road network and how it connects into bridges and the surrounding area, as well as the active transportation network. But I think there could be a big impetus through this Midtown development to help support and build the case for more rapid transit on Trafalgar, which then goes up to connect to Uptown, which is a future plan. We also received a letter from the Fed saying, how come you're not building more density around Sheridan, right? So now you've got more and more population that's building a dense corridor along Trafalgar that is already designed for rapid transit with a lot of backs to the street, not too many curb cuts. And then we've also, desire rapid transit along Dundas. So even though those things aren't in this zone, I think, a map showing how this can connect into or help support and build the case for more rapid transit across town. And we all know that rapid transit, the ridership just goes way up when it's, got fixed rails or rapid bus or various things like that. So I just wanted to point out that, and I think, we could talk about some of the things that Midtown would do to help support town-wide initiatives like more rapid transit and more connections. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I'd love to see kind of a map of, how people could move in and out of Midtown more seamlessly and connect to other parts. So thank you.
Councillor Haslett-Beale.
Thank you, through you, Chair Dudek. Well, I will say beyond ditto, thank you very much. You made my morning when I opened it up this morning, and I'm grateful that we had a chance to look at it today. So a couple just follow-ups on behalf of the delegates before I launch to my own questions. There was a question around 16 Mile Creek and it being, would it be included and accredited as parkland? And that's obviously a concern. It's highly constrained. I think the delegate said it's like a mountain goat. So can you just crystallize for us the concepts that you've put forward against how they line up with the new proposed parks plan and dedicated parkland bylaw?
So through you, Madam Chair, I understand that Council had a meeting on that yesterday. And so we are doing our best to stay abreast of what the topics of conversation are. And I just wanted to clarify around the 16 Mile Creek is that we're not calculating any of that land in terms of parkland within Midtown. The calculations that are provided, and hopefully they're clear within the presentation, include just the net new parkland, and then the existing parkland is also listed for overall total. But we've separated those things out, so that's clear. So in terms of what's emerging through the bylaw, which I understand is being updated to reflect, the modifications through Bill 23. We've had some side conversations with town staff and the Parks Department to ensure that we're understanding where they're headed with that. And I guess in terms of the numbers that we're showing in Midtown, there are limitations to what's achievable through the development process. So what you can actually extract from development, I think someone referred to the calculation, the 5%, 2%, depends on land use mix and that kind of stuff. And we've done some preliminary analysis to understand that as well. And the 12% that we're showing isn't fully what you can get out of development. Is greater than what you can get out of development. So, it would what we're showing here would require additional strategies. So that would be, acquisition, which is land acquisition for park purposes, and then not to count as parkland, but also to think more broadly about what additional recreation could be possible in the hydro corridor lands, for instance, which is something that we have utilized in other projects, including in York Region, thinking about that actively in consultation with hydro folks to understand what kind of recreational possibilities there could be there. Not that it's town-owned parkland whatsoever, but that it's accessible to people. So we continue to, talk with our town counterparts to understand, where the bylaw is headed. But we think we've put forward kind of a balanced approach to the parkland, some of which can be extracted through development and others that would be through acquisition.
So thank you for that comprehensive answer. I'm not quite done though. For clarity, the green, where you say community park, neighborhood park, that does not include this concept of a promenade or a sliver park or a pocket park, which is in the parks plan. Those would be in addition to or a requirement of the developer on top of what you propose is the park space?
If we pull up any one of the concepts, I think maybe that would be helpful just so we can point out what we calculated and what that's aligned to. I don't know what number or how that appears on the screen. Is it possible to pull up one of the concepts parks plan? Okay. So for instance, and noted on the nomenclature between what's in the parkland strategy, and I think we acknowledge and we're aware that there's a range of different types of parks that the town has brought forward through that plan. We've selected just a couple of those types here. We're not illustrating all of the types. It is possible, should through consultation with you and the community, if a greater array of different typologies need to be articulated, we can think about that. But the calculations that you see here, community park aligns with that darker green. Neighborhood park is that kind of more fluorescent green. So those are the two pieces that we're calculating here. So should there be additional parks beyond this, that could be other typologies, promenades, slivers, what have you, that a developer might propose, that would be either a different solution to what we have suggested here or in addition to. But I think maybe it's a nomenclature question that's coming up right now. We haven't included the full array of all of the names of things. We are focusing on the larger kind of parkland elements because we think they create a better kind of complete community as to kind of nail down the neighborhood level park in particular.
Can we quote you on that?
Which part?
Because that was a great statement, because they make a better complete community when they're real parks, not necessarily a sidewalk. So thank you for that. In terms of what takes greater authority, so and maybe you have to take this away, but I think it's an important thing for us to understand. We have a parkland dedication bylaw that we're considering, and then we're going to have a new OPA in place, which has the higher authority and which is a developer compelled to comply to.
So through you, Madam Chair, and my understanding is that the bylaw is going to set the rate, and that's going to be what the developer, through the Planning Act, they would be required to provide. The official plan amendment and the schedules of that amendment will identify the locations and roughly the size and kind of configuration of the parks, wherever we land with the concepts about what you want to see in Midtown. But in terms of what a developer would be required to provide, that's derived through Bill 23 and reflected in the bylaw.
Okay, so.
Madam Chair, if I may elaborate, what we envision for the area is much like we did for North Oakville, where we have a master parks agreement, which kind of blends the policy objective of the land uses with the policies contained within the bylaw. So we have a mechanism to capture and achieve the vision that's painted in the OP vision.
Okay, thank you for that. One of my concerns for the public meeting is that you've now articulated that in order to achieve this concept, I think as Councillor Alger did the math as well, there is lands that would not be contributed by the developer. And that comes at a cost to the town, and a strategy needs to be employed in order to provide and meet this. And, it's kind of like giving somebody something that's marvelous to look at, and you see more green and you're all excited and you're thinking, wow, like we're moving in the right direction, but then all of a sudden you yank it away because, well, where's the strategy to get those parks close to where people live? So is it possible in those public meetings to clarify that these are aspirational? I just think it's very important that people understand that.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that's an excellent comment and something that we will seek to make sure is clear to the participants that come through to the engagements. Clarity of communication and understanding the planning process, which I know can be quite dense, is one of our objectives. So we'll definitely take that comment to heart. Thank you.
Thank you. So some additional questions. So each of the concepts show this variation in FSI, and they use the word max. So can you just clarify for me, is that really max, or is that max and then there's going to be a whole bunch of exceptions that allow them to go even higher?
So through you, Madam Chair, I think that says draft max, just to put that on the record. And we are at the beginning of understanding how the density and height distribution is arranged in Midtown. And also we don't yet have the full understanding of what additional policy tools we might want to explore if we have other objectives we do want to achieve. So I'm giving an open-ended answer because we don't yet know exactly what the policies will say. And I think our general intent is that the heights that we've shown is kind of a generally up to, we think this is appropriate. And the densities that we've shown are draft maximums that align generally with those heights that give us that output of the yields. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have to continue to coordinate with the servicing and the transportation analysis to understand limitations within the hard infrastructure that we'll have to take on. And also looking at the policies that had previously been proposed, are there good ideas in there that we need to consider? And that's some policy things that we haven't yet fully dug into that we'll continue to think about. So I don't have a precise answer for you yet, but it is going to be part of the policy development, is understanding what are the levers we have in place to get at the objectives that we want. If we want better retail, or if we want better education facilities, or whatever it is, we want to encourage certain types of development over others. There may be reasons to make exceptions, but we don't know what those are.
But is it possible that those exceptions still do not exceed a max, which you have articulated you think may be appropriate?
It could be possible.
Okay. In terms of the calculation of population, what did you use for people per unit?
I did not bring all of those stats with me, but we can provide, what we do. I'm seeing it in my mind, the further assumptions that we had. But we did consult with the other members of our team, and we have the assumptions that we can provide to back up those numbers.
I'd appreciate that, because people are floating around everything from 1.59 to 2.8. It is going to be a multi-generational kind of environment. It is going to have, as you've stated early on, young and young at heart, and we have a growing population that is everybody sticks together, and lives together for a longer period. So that population is a factor that I think we have to understand, because as a few people tried to point out, this is double, than what we saw last time. It's 14,000 people and jobs more than what the area servicing plan articulated in 21. So just understanding that as you get to the finer detail would be helpful. And further to that, understanding the developable metric, because the actual development on the land, whether it's 0.7 or 0.6, can really affect our ability to get green around it and to cover off what may be decided to be as slivers or pockets or whatever. And so I'm not sure what developable area metric you used on a block, but that would be helpful to understand as well. It was 0.7 on the area servicing plan, so as an FYI. Could you just also maybe comment a little bit on the public consultation? So I love that they're going to be, you know, roundtables, that you've got a workbook, that people are going to work through this. Are you going to show them the pictures of what you've got in this presentation? And I'd suggest there's some pictures probably in the Parks Plan book as well. And ask people, you know, does this embody what you see in Midtown? Because pictorially, there's some examples there that, you know, I would love to get that feedback from the public. Does this feel like the future of Oakville? You know, is this a plus or a minus? So are you going to use those visuals at all?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would definitely want to look at that document so that I actually understand the parkland categories that you're considering. That way I can come back to Councillor Elgar and suggest the right terminology that we're using. Again, as Leah said, we're looking at what we've called community parks, and I thought we had that definition right, and neighborhood parks. The other ones are smaller. They could be different or they could be additive. But it's really the larger usable parks that are most important in terms of community building. So we will use the images that we've shown, but I will also look at that document and pull images from that document that reflect the size, the concept, the role and function of various different types of parks. So a large civic park, for example, or a community park, has a different role and function than a neighborhood park. And we'll want to make those things kind of clear.
Okay, thank you. I think it's going to be helpful to have the additive piece and to use the similar nomenclature in case it's not really clear. I'm not a big fan of calling a promenade a park. At least in the United States, and some of those examples you gave us today, you know, they're honest about it. They call it a plaza, or they call it a sidewalk. They call it hardscape, and I think we got to be upfront about that. My last sort of technical question is, you're showing an FSI in a bulk area. You're not showing whether or not there'll be an articulation of, okay, I'm 30 here, now I'm going to be at 26 because I border beside a building, or it's going to create a shadow effect. And I know that seems like a devil in the details, but it's about livability. And I'm wondering if that's going to be shown in the preferred concept.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, at this point in the development of the concepts, those FSIs are on a gross basis for the precinct as a whole. So, you know, that's the level of detail that we're working at right now, which is helpful for us as we articulate the concept in general and the range of the land uses. Where the official plans amendment schedules will land in terms of the granularity of detail may not be on a building by building basis. You know, we're not in the business of creating specific building envelopes through an OPA level. But the 3D, there will be a 3D articulation of the preferred concept that is a version of what that policy framework could enable. And then we can dig into the details around what that preferred concept includes. But for now, it is on a gross basis, and we will continue to, you know, advance the level of detail as we continue on with the OPA development and articulating that on a policy basis. And there's other tools to also consider when we think about how buildings relate to one another, for instance. So separation distances between towers and shadow standards for parks and step backs from the base building to a tower and street wall heights and lots of things that are very common to have at an OPA level, which are other things that can also control or at least direct how urban design can be managed at this scale, knowing that there's more tools at our disposal, zoning bylaws, urban design guidelines, et cetera, that can further and further articulate how buildings can relate to one another.
Okay. And Madam Chair, my last question. There was a suggestion of a sensitivity analysis being done. And I'm wondering if A, that was written down, B, who would provide that to us at a future date? Commissioner, anybody? Who's ducking?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think we'd have to explore that more to understand what the end result of a sensitivity analysis would be. It's not clear in my mind how we would go about that exercise, so it would be worth exploring with the.
So I don't know if Jim's left the building, but we'll get you his phone number.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps for the next round of feedback, we know that there are going to be amenity spaces in these, the proposed buildings. It'd be interesting to know what typically could or would be provided with some of the buildings of this size, just in terms of as that would relate to comment earlier about a community center, whether something like that would be needed in time. We'd just be curious if you have any information that you could bring back to us on that, or you have it now.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't have it now, but there's definitely ability for us to look at in high-density projects, what types of indoor and outdoor amenity space that buildings typically provide, and understand also what the trends are here in Oakville. But I would like to draw a distinction between amenity space that's delivered through a development and that of like a community center, for instance. So in my mind, those things are different. So a community center would be likely publicly owned and run, libraries, typical community recreation, that kind of thing, as opposed to amenity that's to serve a population of a building, which are good to have both standards, right? So you're meeting some of your needs internal to a building, then also within the community at large.
No question, I understand. And for staff, we're thrilled to see the amount of phone calls and emails we received today, as well as the turnout this evening. Trafalgar, Chartwell, Oakville, Lakeside, Chartwell, Maple Grove, and Joshua Creek. We don't have a session set up for the area that's likely to be most impacted by it. Just wondering if you could take it away, whether we could have a session at OTCC, given the obvious interest that we have from the RAs.
Through you, Madam Chair, we will take that back. There is a bit of strategy in that. Just you want to make sure that there's critical mass at each one. So having it spread too much, you may diffuse the energy. So, but we'll take that back and see if that's a possibility.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Seeing, oh, sorry, Janet.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I checked off everything on my list. So one of the questions I didn't get to is all the concepts that you showed had higher buildings than the original OP. And could you articulate for us what's the rationale for not providing a concept that had lower heights and perhaps less population than what you've provided?
Through you, Madam Chair. So this exercise, as you know, is a very long-term planning exercise. And so what we're doing is both trying to understand, the joint best planning estimates, which get us to a certain time horizon, but also knowing that we can't close the door on evolution and continued growth and change. Also understanding what's happening, in terms of development in the market today around high density intensification and what that looks like. So those really drove some of our understanding, as well as the positioning of Midtown Oakville at the top of the intensification hierarchy, even within the growth plan. So within the province as a whole, this is at the very top of the type of place that's supposed to accommodate the highest and densest forms of development. So that's really what drove some of our decision-making around the ranges of heights that we've articulated today.
Okay, thank you for that. And my last question is, I note in the schedule that you've got a technical advisory meeting and a developer stakeholder meeting, but I don't see the RA stakeholder meeting on that chart, which was what was provided earlier.
Through you, Madam Chair, our intention has always been to integrate the RAs with the general public, so not having a separate and distinct path for RAs. We had initially held the RA meeting in response to the earlier process. Going forward, it was our desire that the RA representation would be in and amongst the different voices that are represented across the town.
Okay, so with that answer, then I think it reinforces the need to make sure that we do a fourth meeting. I think you're going to get the turnout that you're going to need, your capacity, and their commitment to this project and has been almost a decade long. And I think that it speaks to respect for the amount of energy and time they've put in, but also it's not a lot to ask to make sure that the southeast and even the south, sort of, I'm going to call it central, has its own meeting as well.
Madam Chair, I certainly didn't want to convey any disrespect to the RAs, but I actually wanted to leverage their input across the general public so that we have their experience available and their history available at each one and not concentrated in one area. So I want to convey it was not a disrespect, but actually a higher level of respect.
Thank you for that clarification. Seeing no further speakers, I've got a motion from Councillor Longo that the report entitled Midtown Program Land Use Block Concepts be received for information. Any opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. And we are adjourned. Thank you again for all your participation and your input.